My daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me to apologize to her mother or get out of her house. She stood there at the head of the dining table in her silk designer dress, smirking like she had just won a war. She started in her own head. I did not yell, I did not cry. I simply wiped my mouth, picked up my purse, and said 3 words, "Check the deed." Less than 24 hours later, she was staring at a piece of paper that would shatter her entire fake reality. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an entitled person a lesson they will never forget. My name is Desiree Washington. I am 58 years old and I built my wealth the hard way. I run a highly successful private equity firm, but you would never know it by looking at me. I do not wear flashy diamonds to the grocery store, and I drive a sensible sedan because when you actually have power, you do not need to scream it from the rooftops. My son Marcus is 30 years old. He is a talented financial analyst, but ever since he met his wife Chloe, he has been desperately trying to fit into a world of old money and white privilege that he thinks he needs to be respected. Chloe is 28 years old and believes her country club membership makes her royalty. When Marcus and Chloe got married, they moved into a stunning $5 million mansion in one of the most exclusive gated communities in Atlanta. Chloe loved playing the wealthy socialite. She loved hosting lavish parties and subtly bragging to her friends about how her brilliant husband bought this incredible estate all on his own. I let her play her little games. I stayed in the background maintaining my quiet life because Marcus loved her. And as a mother, you swallow your pride to keep the peace. But peace is a fragile thing when you are dealing with people who mistake your silence for weakness. The breaking point arrived on Thanksgiving Day. Chloe had decided to host the family dinner at the mansion to show off her newly renovated dining room. When I arrived, the house was suffocatingly perfect. Caterers were walking around with silver trays and classical music was playing softly from hidden speakers. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a museum exhibit. I walked into the kitchen carrying my traditional pecan pie, baked from a recipe my own grandmother passed down to me. It was the only thing Marcus had specifically requested I bring. Waiting for me in the living room was Brenda. Brenda is Chloe's mother, a 55-year-old woman who wore too much perfume and smiled with her teeth, but never her eyes. Brenda comes from a family that used to have money decades ago, but is now quietly drowning in debt. Of course, she would never admit that. To Brenda, image was everything. She spent her entire life looking down her nose at people she deemed beneath her, and she had made it very clear from day one that she considered a black woman from a working-class neighborhood in Detroit to be entirely beneath her. We all sat down at the massive mahogany dining table. The caterers served courses of food that looked like art but tasted like cardboard. I sat quietly listening to Chloe and Brenda talk over everyone else, bragging about their upcoming ski trips and name-dropping people I did not care about. Marcus sat beside Chloe, nodding along, offering weak smiles, and completely shrinking into himself. It broke my heart to see my son minimize his own presence just to make his wife and mother-in-law comfortable. As the main course was cleared away, the caterer brought out my pecan pie and placed it on the table alongside a store-bought French tart Brenda had brought. Brenda stared at my pie as if someone had placed a piece of garbage on her pristine table. She let out a soft, theatrical sigh and reached for her wine glass. "You know," Desiree Brenda began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "it is so quaint that you still bake your own desserts. It really reminds us of your humble beginnings. I suppose when you grow up without much, you learn to make do with whatever cheap ingredients you can find in the pantry. But honestly, sweetie, we have caterers for a reason. You really do not need to bring your little home economics projects to a dinner like this. It simply does not fit the aesthetic Chloe has worked so hard to create." The table went completely silent. Even the caterer stopped moving in the corner of the room. I looked at Marcus, expecting him to defend his mother, expecting him to say that he was the one who asked for the pie. But Marcus just looked down at his lap, suddenly finding his napkin incredibly interesting. A wave of profound disappointment washed over me. I realized then that my son was completely lost to them. I slowly set down my fork. I looked directly at Brenda and let a calm, polite smile spread across my face. "Brenda," I said, my voice low and steady. "You do not need to worry about my beginnings. I am quite proud of where I came from. It taught me the value of hard work and honest money. It is a shame not everyone learns those lessons. From what I understand about the Kensington family business lately, you might want to ask me for a few of those cheap recipes. You are going to need them when the bank finally calls in those loans you have been hiding from your country club friends." Brenda's face drained of color. Her jaw actually dropped, and her hand shook so badly she spilled a few drops of her expensive red wine onto the white tablecloth. She gasped, placing a hand over her chest, as if she had been physically struck. Chloe slammed her hands on the table and stood up so fast her chair tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "How dare you!" Chloe screamed, her face turning a violent shade of red. "How dare you come into my house, eat my food, and disrespect my mother like that? You are nothing but a jealous, bitter old woman who cannot stand the fact that your son upgraded his life." Chloe pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. "You will apologize to my mother right now," she demanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You will apologize to her, or you can get out of my house and never come back. I will not tolerate this kind of ghetto disrespect under my roof." There it was. The mask had completely slipped. The ugly truth of how she really saw me was out in the open for everyone to hear. Marcus finally looked up, his eyes wide with panic. "Mom, just say you are sorry," he whispered, pleading with me. "Please just apologize so we can enjoy the holiday." I looked at my son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, and I felt absolutely nothing but pity for the weak man he had chosen to become. I did not raise my voice. I did not lose my temper. The most dangerous people in the room are never the ones screaming. I calmly stood up from the table. I picked up my cloth napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth, placing it neatly next to my plate. I picked up my leather purse from the floor and slid the strap over my shoulder. Chloe was breathing heavily, crossing her arms over her chest, wearing a smug, victorious smirk. She really thought she had put me in my place. She thought she was the queen of the castle, banishing the peasant. I walked around the table, stopping right behind Chloe's chair. I leaned in close enough to smell the champagne on her breath. I looked her dead in the eye and spoke in a voice so quiet and cold it froze the entire room. "Check the deed." I did not wait for her to process what I had said. I turned around and walked out the front door, the heavy oak shutting behind me with a solid, satisfying click. The cool evening air felt refreshing against my face. I got into my car, drove home, and poured myself a generous glass of bourbon. I slept incredibly well that night. The next morning, the sun was shining brightly over the upscale neighborhoods of Atlanta. Chloe was nursing a slight hangover, sitting in her custom-designed kitchen, drinking espresso, and probably congratulating herself on finally getting rid of her horrible mother-in-law. But at exactly 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Chloe opened the door in her silk robe, expecting a package delivery. Instead, she found a man in a cheap suit holding a thick manila envelope. He asked to confirm her identity and handed over the envelope before walking away without another word. Chloe opened it casually, pulling out the official-looking documents inside. It was a legal notice, specifically a 30-day notice to vacate the premises. Chloe read the words over and over again, her brain refusing to understand what her eyes were seeing. The document clearly stated that the lease agreement for the property was being terminated by the legal owner. Chloe scrambled to look at the bottom of the page, searching for the name of the landlord. She had always assumed Marcus owned the house. He told her he bought it with his bonuses, but right there, printed in bold black ink, was the name of the true owner of the $5 million estate. D.W. Trust, Desiree Washington. The woman she had just thrown out was the woman who owned the roof over her head. Chloe stared at the legal document in her trembling hands. The words 30-day notice to vacate seemed to float off the page and punch her in the chest. D.W. Trust, Desiree Washington. The name echoed in her head like a cruel joke. She dropped the paper onto the marble kitchen island, the marble that she had personally picked out, the kitchen that she had completely remodeled with what she thought was her husband's money. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She grabbed her phone with shaking fingers and dialed her husband. Marcus was sitting in his corner office in downtown Atlanta, pretending to analyze quarterly reports while actually nursing a massive headache from the Thanksgiving disaster. When his phone rang and he saw Chloe's name flashing on the screen, his stomach instantly tied itself into a heavy knot. He took a deep breath and swiped to answer. Before he could even say hello, her voice shattered the quiet of his office. "Marcus! What is this?" Chloe screamed through the speaker so loudly that Marcus had to pull the phone away from his ear. "What is what, Chloe? Please calm down," he said, rubbing his temples. "A man in a cheap suit just handed me an eviction notice, Marcus. An eviction notice for our house. And do you want to know whose name is on the bottom of it? Your mother. Your ghetto low-class mother is listed as the property owner." Chloe was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floors, her silk robe flowing behind her. Marcus felt all the blood drain from his face. The room started to spin. "Chloe, please listen to me. I can explain everything," he stammered. "Explain what, Marcus?" she yelled. "You told me you bought this house. You sat across from my parents at dinner the week we got engaged, and you told them you used your massive stock bonuses to pay for this estate in cash." Marcus loosened his tie, feeling like he was choking. The truth was, Marcus was a junior analyst. When he met Chloe, he was so intimidated by her family wealth and so desperate to impress her that he went to his mother. He begged me to help him buy a house that would make him look like a success in their eyes. Because I loved him, I created a trust and purchased the property, allowing them to live there rent-free. But I kept the deed in the trust's name. I always knew Chloe was materialistic, and I wanted to protect my son's assets just in case things went south. I never imagined he would lie to her about it. "Chloe, please," he begged over the phone. "I just wanted to give you the world. I knew your mother would never accept me if she knew I was just starting out. My mother bought the house as an investment and let us live here. It is still our home." "It is not our home," Chloe shrieked. "It is her home, and she is kicking us out. You are a pathetic liar, Marcus. You let me make a fool of myself bragging to all my friends about my rich husband. You are just a broke mama's boy." She hung up the phone, leaving Marcus listening to the dead silence. Panic set in completely. Marcus knew he had pushed me too far the night before, but he still believed he could charm his way out of it. He immediately dialed my private number. I was sitting on the leather sofa in my modest living room, sipping a cup of black coffee and reading the morning Financial Times. My phone buzzed on the coffee table next to me. The screen displayed Marcus calling. I did not pick it up. I simply watched it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again, and then again. He was relentless. After the 5th call, a voice message popped up on my screen. I tapped the icon and brought the phone to my ear to listen. "Mom, please pick up," he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation and fear. "Chloe just got the notice. Mom, you cannot do this to us. We have nowhere to go. You cannot just kick your own son out on the street because of a stupid argument at dinner. Please call me back. I will make her apologize. I promise I will make her say sorry. Just stop the eviction. Let us talk about this like adults." I deleted the message before he even finished speaking. It was pathetic. He was 30 years old and still trying to negotiate peace between two women instead of taking responsibility for his own lies. He wanted me to save him from the consequences of his own deceit. I felt a deep ache in my chest because a mother never wants to see her child fail or suffer. But I also knew that if I saved him now, he would spend the rest of his life being a footstool for the Kensington family. They would never respect him. They would just continue to use him and laugh behind his back. Sometimes the only way to teach a man how to stand up is to remove the floor from beneath him. I turned my phone on silent and went back to reading my newspaper. I had major corporate acquisitions to handle today. I did not have time for the temper tantrums of spoiled children. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Chloe was having a full meltdown. She had thrown a decorative glass vase against the hallway wall, shattering it into 100 tiny, shimmering pieces. She grabbed her phone again and called the only person she knew who could fix this mess: her mother. Brenda answered on the second ring. She was lounging by her indoor pool, wearing a designer swimsuit and sipping a green smoothie. "Good morning, darling." Brenda purred, her voice perfectly calm and completely ignorant of the financial storm that was brewing right above her head. "Mom, it is an absolute disaster," Chloe cried, her voice echoing through the empty mansion. "Marcus lied to us. He lied about everything. He does not own the house. His horrible mother owns the house, and she just served me with a 30-day eviction notice. She is throwing us out on the street. Brenda sat up straight, her green smoothie splashing onto the expensive wooden deck. "What are you talking about, Chloe? Marcus bought that house with his bonuses. We saw the paperwork with our own eyes." "You saw fake paperwork," Mom Chloe sobbed, wiping mascara from her cheeks. "He just admitted it to me on the phone. That woman bought the house and she is legally kicking us out because of what happened last night. She wants to humiliate us." Brenda's face turned a deep shade of crimson. The sheer audacity of this working-class woman thinking she could play games with the Kensington family was deeply insulting to her. Brenda let out a harsh, cruel laugh. "Oh, honey, please stop crying," she said, waving her hand dismissively, even though Chloe could not see her. "That pathetic woman is just trying to flex the little bit of money she saved up over her miserable life. She wants a power struggle. Fine, I will give her one. Dry your tears, Chloe. You are a Kensington. We do not get evicted by nobodies. I'm going to call the bank right now. I will write a check and buy that ridiculous house out from under her in cash. We will see the look on her face when I slide a multi-million-dollar check across her desk and tell her to take her money and go back to the slums where she belongs." Chloe felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you, Mom," she sniffled. "Just let me handle it, sweetie," Brenda replied confidently. "Go get dressed. I will call you back when the transfer is done." Brenda hung up the phone and marched into her home office. She pulled out her gold-embossed checkbook. She dialed the private number for her wealth manager at the bank, fully expecting them to bend over backwards for her. A cheerful teller answered the line. "Good morning, Kensington Family Accounts. This is Brenda Kensington," she snapped. "I need to authorize an immediate wire transfer for $5.2 million. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Kensington, the teller, finally said, her voice losing its cheerful tone, "I am terribly sorry. I cannot authorize that transfer." Brenda narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Transfer the funds immediately." "Ma'am," the teller replied, sounding genuinely uncomfortable. "Your accounts have been frozen due to a massive breach of collateral limits. You currently have 0 available funds. Every single account under your name has been completely locked by the bank's main financial oversight department pending further review." Ignorance is a luxury that only the foolish can afford, and Chloe was spending it in abundance. Despite the eviction notice sitting on her custom kitchen island, she refused to accept reality. In her mind, she was still the untouchable queen of her social circle. To prove this to herself, she decided to host a spontaneous luxury shopping spree for her 3 best friends. She invited them to the most exclusive designer boutique in Buckhead, promising to treat them to whatever they wanted. The boutique was a sanctuary of excessive wealth, smelling of expensive oud and fresh lilies. A personal shopper greeted them, holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Chloe walked through the store like she owned it, running her hands over silk dresses and genuine leather handbags. She picked out a pale pink cashmere coat, a pair of diamond-studded heels, and matching designer sunglasses, encouraging her friends to grab whatever caught their eye. They brought their massive pile of luxury goods to the sleek glass checkout counter. The total came to an amount that would take most people an entire year to earn. Chloe casually reached into her designer purse, pulled out the heavy metal black card Marcus had given her, and slapped it onto the glass counter with a very smug smile. The sales associate picked up the heavy card and smiled politely, inserting it into the sleek card reader. Chloe took a sip of her champagne, turning to her friends, already talking about their exclusive dinner reservations. A sharp beep echoed from the machine. The associate frowned slightly, wiping the metal chip with her thumb and inserting it again. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Kensington. The machine is just being stubborn today," she said. Chloe rolled her eyes and let out an exaggerated sigh. "It is fine. Just type in the numbers manually," she instructed, waving her hand dismissively. The associate typed the numbers, but the machine beeped again, flashing a bright red message stating "declined." The sales associate looked up, her cheeks flushing with secondhand embarrassment. "I am really sorry, Mrs. Kensington, but this card is coming up as declined. Do you have another form of payment you would like to use?" Chloe froze. Her friends stopped talking and stared. The silence in the boutique felt suffocating. "That is impossible," Chloe snapped, her voice rising. "Run it again, my husband makes millions." "I assure you I have run it 3 times," the associate said softly. Chloe snatched the card, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. She dug furiously into her purse and pulled out a platinum credit card, commanding her to use it. Another sharp beep. Declined. "Try this gold one," Chloe yelled. Declined again. The sales associate slowly pushed the luxury items aside, apologizing that none of the cards were working. Chloe completely lost her mind, slamming her fists against the glass counter, causing her champagne flute to tip over. "You are doing it wrong," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the terrified worker. "You are just trying to humiliate me." The store manager quickly walked over, asking Chloe to leave the premises. Chloe grabbed her empty purse and stormed out of the boutique, leaving her friends behind in absolute shock. While Chloe was throwing a tantrum, Marcus was sitting in his office, staring at his computer screen in sheer terror. After Chloe had called him screaming about the eviction notice, he finally decided to check his financial accounts. He logged into his banking portal, expecting to see his healthy balances. Instead, he was greeted by a screen full of red zeros. Every single account was locked and every credit line was frozen. The supplemental black card he had given Chloe, the platinum card he used for business lunches, and the gold card for emergency expenses were completely shut down. Marcus frantically clicked through the transaction histories, finally finding a formal digital notice sitting in his secure inbox. It was a letter from the legal department of my financial trust. The letter stated that as the primary account holder and guarantor, Desiree Washington had exercised her right to sever all financial ties and dissolve all supplementary credit lines issued to Marcus Washington, effective immediately. It finally dawned on him. He had spent the last 5 years living a complete illusion. He had convinced himself that he was a brilliant financial mind who provided a life of luxury for his beautiful wife. But the truth was, he was nothing more than a puppet, and I had just cut the strings. He did not own the house or the money. It all belonged to me. Marcus grabbed his suit jacket and ran out of his office, ignoring his secretary. He drove his car like a maniac, weaving through the busy Atlanta traffic until he reached the towering glass skyscraper that housed my private equity firm. He rushed into the grand marble lobby, walking straight past the front desk, toward the secure elevators leading to the executive floors. "Sir, you cannot go up there," a voice called out. Marcus turned and saw David, the head of building security. David had known Marcus for years, usually greeting him with a warm smile, but today his face was stern and his posture rigid. "I need to see my mother," Marcus demanded, pressing the call button. "It is an emergency. David, let me up." "I am sorry, Mr. Washington," David said, stepping between Marcus and the elevator doors. "Mrs. Washington gave explicit instructions this morning, stating that you are no longer permitted on the executive floors under any circumstances." Marcus stared at the security guard, his brain refusing to process the words pleading that he was her son and just needed 5 minutes. David pulled a small tablet from his belt. "Mrs. Washington also instructed me to inform you that if you do not have a scheduled appointment, you will be asked to leave the premises. And since her schedule is completely full for the next 6 months, I suggest you turn around and walk out the front door." Marcus felt a hot flash of anger and humiliation trying to push past the guard. David placed a heavy hand on his chest, stopping him instantly. "Do not make me do this, Marcus," David warned, his voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "I will have you physically removed if I have to. Do not embarrass yourself." Marcus looked around the busy lobby at dozens of professionals staring at him. He backed away, slumping in defeat, and walked out the sliding glass doors into the hot city streets with absolutely nothing. Chloe was sitting in the driver's seat of her luxury car in the parking lot of the shopping mall. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, explaining that his mother had frozen all their accounts and he had just been thrown out of her corporate building. The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. She had no money and no home. She was about to lose everything that made her feel important. But Chloe Kensington was not the type of person to admit defeat or take responsibility for her own horrific behavior. If she was going down, she was going to drag my name through the mud with her. She pulled down the sun visor and looked at her reflection in the mirror, deliberately messing up her perfectly styled hair. She pinched her cheeks and forced herself to hyperventilate until real tears welled up in her eyes. She opened her social media app and hit the record button. "Hey guys," She began, her voice trembling with perfectly executed fake sorrow. "I am in so much pain right now, and I need a safe space to talk." She wiped a tear from her cheek, staring directly into the camera lens. "Last night my husband and I hosted a beautiful Thanksgiving dinner for our family. But my mother-in-law, who has always hated me because of my background, decided to ruin it. She screamed at my mother and insulted my family. And when I politely asked her to stop, she told me she was going to destroy my life." Chloe let out a dramatic sob, covering her mouth. "Guys, she owns the house we live in. My husband trusted her with our finances, and she used that trust to trap us. She just served us with an eviction notice and froze all of our bank accounts, leaving us with absolutely nothing. We are now completely broke." She paused, looking down before delivering the most devastating lie she could possibly invent. "The worst part is she knows we have been quietly struggling with fertility issues. She knows we are actively trying to conceive, and she is throwing us out on the street right in the middle of our journey. How can a mother be so tyrannical and evil? Please share this video. People need to know the truth about Desiree Washington." She stopped recording, and instantly her tears vanished. A calculating smile crept across her face as she hit the post button, sending her web of lies to her followers. By the time the sun set on Atlanta that evening, Chloe had managed to turn herself into the ultimate internet martyr. Her tearful video spread across social media platforms like a wild brush fire fueled by gasoline. She had perfectly weaponized her white tears, painting me as the angry, bitter black mother-in-law who was maliciously trying to destroy her son's happiness. The comments section was a toxic wasteland of strangers calling me a monster, a narcissist, and a tyrant. They expressed profound sympathy for the poor, beautiful young woman who was supposedly just trying to start a family. Chloe knew exactly what she was doing. She knew how to manipulate the algorithm and play into the exact stereotypes that society so easily swallows. She watched her follower count skyrocket, reveling in the attention while completely ignoring the reality that she had brought this entire situation upon herself. It did not take long for the digital chaos to bleed into my personal reality. My phone began to vibrate incessantly on my kitchen counter. It was not Marcus this time. It was my extended family, cousins, aunts, and uncles who only ever called me when they needed a small loan or a favor, were suddenly blowing up my phone with desperate urgency. They had all seen the video. None of them knew the actual truth about my financial empire or the fact that I owned the mansion. To them, I was still just Desiree, the hardworking widow who had a decent job and a comfortable life. They saw the video and instantly assumed I had lost my mind and kicked my son out of a house he owned. The notifications piled up on my screen, each one more frantic and judgmental than the last. I finally answered a call from my older sister, Martha. Martha had always been concerned with appearances and what the neighbors thought. Before I could even say hello, she launched into a breathless tirade. "Desiree, what in the world is wrong with you?" she yelled through the speaker. "Have you seen what your daughter-in-law is posting on the internet? You are making our entire family look like absolute fools. People at my church are already gossiping about it. You are playing right into that angry black woman stereotype and embarrassing all of us. You need to call Marcus right now and beg for his forgiveness. You need to fix this mess before you ruin his marriage completely. Do not let your pride destroy your son's life just because you got your feelings hurt over a stupid pie. You need to yield and make peace immediately." I listened to Martha lecture me while I calmly poured myself another cup of tea. I did not interrupt her. I let her empty her lungs and exhaust her misplaced righteous anger. When she finally paused to take a breath, waiting for my tearful apology, I simply took a sip of my warm tea. "Martha," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion, "you have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. I suggest you mind your own business and focus on your own household." Before she could utter another sound, I pressed the red button on my screen and disconnected the call. I did not explain myself to her. I did not explain myself to any of the relatives who left me angry voicemails. Explaining your actions to people who are determined to misunderstand you is a complete waste of precious energy. I turned my phone completely off and walked into my private home office. The room was a sanctuary of dark mahogany and quiet authority. Outside in the digital world, people were screaming and pointing fingers. But in my world, everything was perfectly silent and under my absolute control. I sat down at my desk and picked up my secure encrypted landline. I dialed the direct number for my chief executive assistant, Elena. Elena was brilliant, ruthless, and fiercely loyal to me. She answered on the very first ring. "Elena," I said, skipping the pleasantries, "I need you to initiate a deep dive into the Kensington family. I want everything. I want their corporate tax returns, their personal bank statements, their hidden offshore accounts, and any shell companies they might be operating. I want to know exactly what Brenda Kensington has been hiding behind her expensive perfume." Elena did not ask any questions. She simply said, "Yes, Mrs. Washington," and began typing rapidly on her keyboard. I knew Brenda was a fraud. You do not survive in the high-stakes world of private equity without developing a sixth sense for financial desperation. Brenda tried too hard. She wore too many designer labels and constantly bragged about her exclusive country club memberships. True wealth is silent but broke. People are always the loudest in the room. I suspected that the Kensington family business, which had been in real estate development for 3 generations, was actually a crumbling facade. They had not successfully completed a major project in nearly 8 years, yet they continued to live like billionaires. The math simply did not add up, and I was going to find out exactly where the missing numbers were buried. I told Elena to hurry. While I waited for Elena to gather the intelligence, I sat back in my leather chair and thought about my son. I thought about how desperate Marcus had been to marry Chloe. He had been completely blinded by her blonde hair, her blue eyes, and the illusion of legacy that her family projected. He wanted so badly to be part of their elite world that he ignored every red flag. But sitting there in the quiet of my office, a dark realization began to wash over me. The Kensingtons were deeply racist and incredibly elitist. They despised everything about me, and they clearly did not respect Marcus. So why did Brenda allow her precious daughter to marry a black man from a working-class background? It was not out of love. It was not out of tolerance. They needed a target. They needed a perfect scapegoat. A few hours later, the security gates at the front of my property opened, and Elena's black town car pulled up the driveway. She walked into my house carrying a massive leather briefcase. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were wide with disbelief. She stepped into my office and placed a thick stack of manila folders directly onto the center of my desk. "You were absolutely right, Mrs. Washington," she said, her voice completely serious. "It is significantly worse than we initially thought. They are not just broke. They are swimming in a catastrophic amount of debt." I opened the first folder and began scanning the documents. Elena had managed to pull the internal financial records of the Kensington Group. The numbers were staggering. They had been hemorrhaging millions of dollars every single quarter for the past decade. The entire family empire was completely bankrupt. I flipped through pages of unpaid vendor invoices, maxed out corporate credit accounts, and desperate emails begging for extensions on property taxes. The Kensington family was a sinking ship, and the water was already up to their necks. They had liquidated every legitimate asset they owned just to keep up appearances and fund Chloe's lavish shopping habits. But what caught my immediate attention was a recent influx of capital, a massive sum of money that had magically appeared in their accounts just 6 months before Marcus and Chloe got married. It was not a bank loan. No reputable financial institution would ever lend money to a company with this kind of disastrous credit history. I looked closer at the source of the funds. It was a private high-risk predatory lending firm known for dealing with desperate clients and charging astronomical interest rates. I took a deep breath and traced my finger along the complex loan agreement. The Kensingtons had borrowed $25 million just to keep their company from being seized by the federal government. But to secure a loan of that magnitude from a predatory lender, they needed a guarantor. They needed someone with a completely clean financial record and a massive amount of verifiable collateral to back up the debt. I turned to the final page of the contract to see who was foolish enough to sign their life away for Brenda's failing company. I stared intently at the signature line at the very bottom of the page, and my blood ran completely cold. The name printed on the guarantor line was Marcus Washington. Beside his printed name was a signature, but it was not his handwriting. The Kensington family was surviving on a massive predatory loan, and the signature was a blatant forgery. They had stolen my son's identity to save their pathetic empire, and I was going to make them pay for every single penny. I was still sitting in my home office, staring at the forged signature on the loan documents, when the loud banging started. Someone was hammering on my front door with a level of aggression that completely shattered the quiet peace of my neighborhood. I closed the manila folder, slid it into my desk drawer, and walked slowly toward the front of the house. I did not rush. When you hold all the cards, there is never any reason to hurry. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open. Standing on my porch was Brenda Kensington, looking frantic. Her usually perfect blonde hair was slightly messy, and her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled. The polished high society mask had completely melted away, leaving nothing but the desperate, panicked face of a cornered animal. Without waiting for an invitation, she pushed past me and marched straight into my living room, bringing the suffocating smell of her heavy perfume into my home. I closed the door calmly and turned to face her. Brenda stood in the center of my modest living room, looking around with open disgust. She sneered at my simple furniture and the framed photographs on the wall. She could not comprehend how a woman who lived in such an ordinary house could possibly hold the power to destroy her entire wealthy existence. "You need to fix this right now, Desiree," she demanded, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are going to call your little lawyers and cancel that ridiculous eviction notice immediately. Then you are going to call the bank and unlock my daughter's credit cards. You have had your fun playing the tough mother-in-law, but the game is over. If you do not do exactly what I say, I promise you destruction today. I will make sure your son spends the next 20 years rotting in a federal prison cell." I did not react to her screaming. I simply walked over to the small wooden table next to my armchair and picked up my phone. I slid my thumb across the screen and silently pressed the record button on my audio application, placing the phone face down on the table. I sat down slowly, crossing my legs, and looked up at her. "Brenda, you are standing in my living room making wild threats," I said, keeping my voice low and perfectly steady now. "Why on earth would Marcus go to federal prison? He is a junior analyst. He has absolutely nothing to do with your family business or your messy corporate finances. He does not even have the authority to sign a basic vendor check for your company. What could you possibly think you have on him?" Brenda let out a harsh, cruel laugh that echoed off my living room walls. "Oh, you really are clueless, are you not?" she mocked, crossing her arms over her chest. "Your stupid son is legally tied to my company, whether he likes it or not today." 6 months ago, the Kensington Group secured a $25 million loan from a private investment firm. We needed the cash to bridge a small temporary gap in our development funding. But the lenders were being difficult. They demanded a secondary guarantor with a spotless financial record to secure the debt. And guess whose name is sitting right there on the bottom line of that massive legal contract? Your golden boy, Marcus. If that loan defaults, the lenders will come after him. And when they realize the money is gone, they will hand the entire file over immediately now. They will hand the file to federal authorities for massive corporate fraud. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees, pretending to look confused and slightly frightened. "That is impossible, Brenda," I said, letting my voice waver, just a fraction of an inch to feed her massive ego. "Marcus is incredibly careful with his finances. I taught him better than that. He would never in a million years sign a document guaranteeing a $25 million loan for a company he does not even own or control. He does not have that kind of collateral, and he knows. He knows it. You are lying to me. You are just trying to scare me into giving you back the house. Show me the proof. Show me his actual signature on those legal documents." Brenda rolled her eyes and took a step closer to me, practically vibrating with arrogant triumph. She completely bought my performance. She honestly believed she had backed me into a corner, and she was eager to rub her victory in my face. "It does not matter if he actually wanted to sign it, Desiree." She spat, her voice dripping with venom. "The signature is on paper. It has been legally notarized by our corporate attorneys. It is a binding federal document. The authorities are not going to care about his excuses. They are going to look at the paperwork, see his name, and lock him away. And you will have to sit back and watch your only child lose his career, his freedom, and his entire future, all because you were too stubborn to let my daughter keep her house." I shook my head slowly, maintaining my facade of a desperate mother trying to understand the situation. "But the bank would verify his identity," I countered. I countered softly, pressing her further into the trap. The underwriters would have required his physical presence. They would have needed to see his identification and watch him sign the papers in person. Marcus was traveling for a financial conference during the entire month you secured that specific loan. I know this for a fact because I paid for his flight. He was nowhere near Atlanta. So how exactly did his signature miraculously end up on a legally binding contract while he was sitting in a hotel room in Chicago, Brenda? How did you get him to sign it today? Brenda threw her head back and laughed again, a terrible grating sound that filled the room. "You are so naive, Desiree," she sneered, looking down at me like I was an ignorant child. "He did not need to be in the room. I signed the damn papers myself. It was incredibly easy to forge his signature. He is weak and he is foolish, and he practically handed us all his personal information the day he begged to marry Chloe. We needed the money to save the Kensington legacy, and he owed us for allowing him into our family very soon. My lawyers stamped it, and the lenders accepted it without a second thought. So yes, I forged his name on a $25 million federal loan document, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to prove it." I let the silence stretch between us for a few long seconds, ensuring the microphone on my phone picked up absolutely every single syllable she just uttered. I wanted her words recorded in perfect, crystal-clear, high-definition audio. "Just to be completely clear, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping its frightened tone and returning to its natural cold authority now. "You are standing in my home telling me that you deliberately committed felony identity theft and massive federal wire fraud by forging my son's signature on a $25 million loan document. And now you are attempting to extort me by threatening to blame him for your illegal actions if I do not give you a $5 million house. Is that the complete summary of your brilliant master plan?" Brenda frowned, suddenly noticing the drastic change in my posture and the absolute ice in my voice. The frightened mother she thought she was bullying had completely vanished today. I sat up perfectly straight, staring at her with the calculating eyes of a predator who had just locked the cage door. "Yes," she snapped, though her voice wavered slightly this time. "That is exactly what I am doing. And you are going to comply right now. Call your lawyers, Desiree. Turn the credit cards back on and cancel the eviction, or I swear I will make that phone call to the police the second I walk out your front door. You have until the end of the day to make your choice." I reached over to the small table. I picked up my phone and calmly tapped the screen to stop the recording. I saved the audio file. "I am not going to call my lawyers, Brenda," I said, walking past her and opening my front door wide. "And I am certainly not going to cancel the eviction notice on my property. I suggest you leave my property right now." Brenda stood frozen, then stepped out onto the porch, glaring at me with pure hatred. I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. I picked up my phone and called my chief counsel. "Initiate the hostile buyout of Kensington immediately." The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Botanical Garden was completely transformed into a breathtaking sanctuary of excessive wealth and calculated philanthropy. Thousands of rare white orchids hung from the vaulted glass ceiling, reflecting the warm glow of massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp black tuxedos glided silently across the polished marble floor, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and beluga caviar. Tonight was the annual Children's Healthcare Gala, and Brenda Kensington was the acting chairwoman of the entire event. She stood near the center stage, radiating arrogant pride, acting as though she owned the entire city of Atlanta completely. Chloe arrived at the gala exactly an hour late, specifically to ensure that all eyes would be on her when she made her grand entrance. She wore a custom emerald green silk designer gown that draped perfectly across her figure. Despite the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen island and her frozen bank accounts, Chloe walked with her head held high. She had completely convinced herself that her mother had already fixed their massive financial problems. In her delusional mind, she was still the untouchable young socialite who could never be harmed by the consequences of her own terrible actions. The room was packed with the most influential politicians, corporate executives, and old money families in the state. Brenda mingled aggressively, kissing cheeks and laughing loudly, ensuring everyone noticed her diamond earrings. She desperately needed this night to be a public triumph to mask the terrifying reality that her family business was crumbling into dust. She had spent the last of her available cash limits just to secure her position as the event chairwoman. To Brenda, maintaining the illusion of immense wealth was far more important than actually possessing it. She felt completely invincible, surrounded by her wealthy, ignorant peers. The massive double doors of the ballroom opened smoothly, and I walked inside. I did not wear a flashy sequined gown or carry a ridiculous oversized designer handbag. I wore a perfectly tailored black evening suit tailored specifically to my exact measurements. Around my neck rested a single strand of authentic South Sea pearls. My makeup was understated, and my hair was neatly styled. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman of immense quiet power who did not need to scream for attention. I paused at the entrance, taking a slow, deliberate look around the extremely crowded room. Chloe was standing near the towering ice sculpture when she finally spotted me. Her smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of absolute horror and deep disgust. She handed her half-empty champagne flute to a passing waiter and began marching aggressively toward the entrance. Her emerald silk gown flowed behind her as she pushed past several wealthy guests, ignoring their confused glances. She was determined to stop me before I could step further into the ballroom and embarrass her in front of her high society friends. She stopped directly in front of me, blocking my forward path completely now. "What on earth do you think you are doing here?" Chloe hissed, her voice low and trembling with absolute venom. "Did you get lost looking for the kitchen staff entrance? You do not belong here, Desiree. This is a private charity gala for the elite families of Atlanta, not a community center potluck dinner. I suggest you turn around and walk right back out those doors before I have security throw you out onto the busy street. You are just trying to humiliate me and my mother tonight, but I will not let you. Leave right now, you pathetic woman." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show even a single ounce of anger or resentment. I simply looked at her flushed face and offered a calm, pleasant smile. "Chloe, you really must learn to control your volatile emotions in public," I said softly, adjusting my silk cuffs. "It is incredibly unbecoming for a woman of your supposed status to throw a temper tantrum in the lobby. I am exactly where I am supposed to be right now." Chloe opened her mouth to scream for the security guards, but we were suddenly interrupted by a man. The executive director of the entire charity foundation, Mr. Sterling, practically sprinted across the marble floor toward us. He completely ignored Chloe, pushing past her emerald gown to stand directly in front of me. He bowed his head deeply, his face glowing with absolute reverence and profound gratitude. "Mrs. Washington," he announced, his voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear clearly, "we are so profoundly honored that you could join us tonight. Please allow me to personally welcome our sole diamond sponsor to the gala. Your unprecedented generosity has completely secured the future of our massive pediatric wing." Chloe physically stumbled backward, as if she had been violently struck across the face. Her jaw dropped open, and all the color rapidly drained from her perfectly contoured cheeks. Across the room, Brenda had paused mid-sentence, staring in absolute shock as Mr. Sterling personally escorted me toward the absolute best table in the entire ballroom. The diamond sponsor table was situated directly in front of the center stage, elevated slightly above the rest of the wealthy guests. I walked past Chloe without giving her a second glance, leaving her standing near the doors, looking like a complete absolute fool. The elegant dinner service began, and the tension in the room was incredibly thick. Brenda sat at the chairwoman table, glaring daggers at the back of my head. She was absolutely seething with intense rage and deeply humiliated that my philanthropic contribution had massively overshadowed her own public efforts. When the dessert plates were finally cleared away, the lights dimmed, and the highly anticipated live auction successfully commenced. The charismatic auctioneer took the stage quickly, explaining that all proceeds would go directly to the hospital foundation. This was the exact moment Brenda had been eagerly waiting for all night long. She fully intended to buy back her stolen public dominance. The very first major item up for bid was an exclusive 2-week luxury vacation to a private island in the Maldives. The bidding started at $10,000. Brenda immediately raised her numbered paddle high into the air, smiling broadly at the large crowd. $15,000, the auctioneer called. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and calmly raised my paddle upward. $20,000, I countered. Brenda snapped her head in my direction, her eyes flashing with pure hatred. She raised her paddle again, almost immediately upwards. $25,000, the auctioneer shouted, pointing directly at Brenda's table with immense enthusiasm. I did not even look at her face. I simply raised my paddle again, resting my elbow comfortably on the white tablecloth. $30,000, I said smoothly. The crowd began to murmur loudly, sensing the intense personal battle unfolding between us. Brenda could not let me win anything. Her massive, fragile ego simply would not allow a working-class black woman to publicly defeat her in a room full of her wealthy peers. She thrust her paddle into the air again, her face turning bright red. $40,000, she yelled, her voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure of her own secret financial reality. I lowered my paddle and offered Brenda a polite, slow golf clap from across the large room. Sold for $40,000? The auctioneer cheered happily as the crowd applauded loudly. Brenda smiled and waved graciously, but I could see the sheer terror hiding behind her eyes. She had just committed $40,000 that she absolutely did not have in her bank. But I was not finished playing with her yet. The next item was a stunning vintage diamond necklace today. The bidding started at $20,000. Brenda raised her paddle, trying to maintain her wealthy facade. I immediately raised mine. $50,000, I called out, pushing the price up incredibly fast. Brenda gritted her teeth and raised her paddle. $60,000, she countered, sweating profusely. I pushed it to $80,000. She stubbornly pushed it to $90,000. The entire ballroom was watching this silent war in absolute awe. I finally stopped bidding at $90,000, forcing Brenda to win the expensive necklace. By the time the auction concluded, Brenda had successfully outbid me on 5 major luxury items total tonight. She had publicly committed over $250,000 to the charity foundation simply to protect her fragile social image. The gala was ending and the winners were directed to the organizer tables to settle their massive accounts. Brenda confidently walked over, flanked by her impressed friends, and handed the treasurer a personal check for her total amount. The treasurer smiled, typing the routing numbers into the electronic verification system required for all large charitable pledges. The machine beeped loudly. A bright red error message flashed across the screen. The check bounced as whispers filled the entire ballroom. The morning after the disastrous charity gala, the entire city of Atlanta was buzzing with the shocking news of Brenda Kensington and her humiliating bounced check. The illusion of the Kensington family wealth had completely shattered overnight. Marcus had spent the entire night sleeping on the small, uncomfortable couch in his office after being denied entry to my corporate building the previous day. He woke up to dozens of missed calls and frantic text messages from his wealthy friends, who were all asking about the spectacular downfall of his mother-in-law. He finally understood the absolute terrifying magnitude of the massive mistake he had made. He had chosen a sinking ship over his own mother, who secretly owned the entire ocean. Marcus felt a deep, crushing wave of panic wash over his tired body. He desperately needed to fix his broken life before he lost everything completely. He splashed cold water on his face, straightened his wrinkled suit, and drove directly to my house. He did not bother knocking. He used the spare key he had kept hidden on his keychain and walked slowly into my quiet living room. I was already sitting at the dining table drinking a cup of warm tea and reviewing the morning financial reports on my tablet. Marcus looked absolutely pathetic. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a frightened little boy who had just been caught stealing from the cookie jar. He fell to his knees right in front of my chair and began to sob uncontrollably. "Mom, please forgive me," he cried, his voice breaking under the heavy weight of his immense guilt. I was so incredibly wrong about everything. Chloe and Brenda are completely crazy. They manipulated me from the very beginning. They made me feel like I was never good enough unless I bought into their expensive lifestyle. It is all their fault, Mom. They poisoned my mind against you. Please just let me come back home. I will do whatever you want me to do. I just cannot live like this anymore. I sat perfectly still, looking down at my only son. A mother naturally wants to reach out and comfort her crying child. She wants to wipe away his tears and tell him that everything will be all right. But Marcus was not a child anymore. He was a 30-year-old man who had cowardly stood by while his arrogant wife and her racist mother completely disrespected me in my own home. He had lied to them about his wealth, and he had lied to me about his true character. I did not reach out to comfort him. Instead, I slowly picked up the thick, heavy manila folder that Elena had delivered to me the previous afternoon. I tossed it casually onto the floor right in front of his trembling knees. The heavy stack of papers spilled out slightly across the expensive rug. "Pick it up, Marcus," I commanded, my voice entirely devoid of any warmth or maternal affection. "Read the documents that your precious new family has been hiding from you." Marcus wiped his wet eyes and reached down with shaking hands. He pulled the top file open and began to read the highlighted corporate financial statements. I watched his face closely as his eyes scanned the disastrous numbers. "The Kensington Group is completely bankrupt," I explained slowly, ensuring he heard every single terrible word. "They have absolutely nothing left. Their bank accounts are completely frozen, and they are currently drowning in a sea of insurmountable corporate debt. Your beautiful wife has been spending money that simply does not exist. And your mother-in-law is a desperate, desperate fraud." Marcus shook his head in absolute disbelief. "But they live in a massive estate." He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "They belong to the most exclusive country clubs in the city. How could they possibly be broke?" "Because they are professional liars, Marcus," I replied coldly. "And you were the perfect gullible target for their ultimate survival plan. Turn to the very last page of the legal contract inside that specific folder. Tell me what you see on the bottom line." Marcus flipped through the heavy stack of legal documents until he reached the final signature page of the massive $25 million predatory loan agreement. He stared at the bottom of the page, and the little remaining color in his face completely vanished. He gasped loudly, dropping the heavy folder onto the floor as if it had physically burned his hands. "That is my name," he whispered, staring blindly at the forged signature on the paper. "But I never signed this document. I have never seen this contract in my entire life, Mom. I swear to you, I did not sign this." "I know you did not sign it, Marcus," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Brenda signed it for you. She forged your signature to secure $25 million in federal loan money from a highly dangerous private investment firm. She stole your identity and legally tied your entire financial future to her completely sinking ship. If that massive loan defaults, the federal authorities will come directly to your office. They will arrest you for massive corporate wire fraud, and you will spend the next 20 years rotting inside a federal prison cell. You chose a family that was willing to sacrifice your entire life just to save their fragile public image." Marcus began to hyperventilate. He clutched his chest, pacing back and forth across my living room floor in a state of absolute terrifying panic. "What do I do, Mom?" he cried, begging me for a solution. "Please tell me how to fix this terrible mess. I cannot go to prison. I have a career and a whole life ahead of me. You have to help me get out of this. You have to save me." I reached onto my dining table and picked up a crisp white envelope containing a single legal document. I held it out toward him. "Inside this envelope are legally binding divorce papers," I stated firmly. "I have already had my top corporate attorneys draft them perfectly. You will sign these papers today, officially ending your marriage to Chloe Kensington. Furthermore, you will agree to testify in federal court against Brenda, confirming that she deliberately forged your signature on those loan documents. If you do this, I will deploy my legal team to protect you from the immense fallout, and I will personally ensure you do not go to prison." Marcus stared at the white envelope as if it contained a venomous snake. "I will protect you, Marcus." I continued, my tone unwavering and completely serious. But you must completely sever all ties with those horrible, toxic women immediately. If you refuse to sign these papers and choose to stay with that family, I will wash my hands of you entirely. I will watch you go down with their sinking ship, and I will not spend a single penny to save you. You must make your final choice right now." Marcus slowly reached out his trembling hand and took the white envelope from my grasp. He looked deeply into my eyes, searching for any sign of a bluff, but he found nothing except cold, absolute resolve. "I will do it," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I will sign them today. I am so sorry for everything, Mom. I really am." Marcus left my house clutching the white envelope tightly against his chest. He drove back to the luxurious mansion that I technically owned, fully intending to confront Chloe and demand an immediate divorce. When he walked through the heavy oak front doors, Chloe was sitting on the living room sofa crying hysterically. She had seen the news about her mother and the charity gala disaster. She was completely trapped and terrified of losing her wealthy lifestyle. When she saw Marcus walk into the room, she immediately ran toward him, throwing her arms around his neck and sobbing into his chest. Marcus gently pushed her away, his face hard and completely unforgiving. He held up the white envelope containing the legal divorce papers. "We are completely done, Chloe," he said, his voice shaking slightly but determined. "Your mother forged my signature on a $25 million loan. She tried to destroy my life, and you treated my mother like absolute garbage. I am filing for divorce right now, and you both are going to federal prison." Chloe stared at the white envelope in absolute horror. She knew exactly what it meant. She was about to lose her husband, her home, and her absolute last remaining connection to any real wealth. Her survival instincts kicked in immediately. She let out a piercing, dramatic wail and dropped to her knees, clutching her stomach tightly. "You cannot leave me, Marcus!" she screamed, producing large, fake crocodile tears. "You cannot divorce me right now. Not today. Not when I finally have good news for us." Marcus froze, staring down at his hysterical wife. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes wide and perfectly innocent. "I am pregnant, Marcus," she whispered softly, her voice breaking with manufactured emotion. "I took a test this morning. We are finally going to have a baby. You are going to be a father. You cannot abandon your own child. You just cannot do this to our family." It was a complete and absolute lie. Chloe was not pregnant. She had entirely invented the pregnancy on the spot as a desperate final maneuver to keep her rich husband from walking out the door. But Marcus was incredibly weak, and he had always desperately wanted to be a father. He stared at Chloe, his mind completely spinning with confusion and conflicting emotions. He looked down at the white envelope containing his only legal escape route. He thought about his child growing up in a broken home, and his foolish, misplaced sense of duty completely overpowered his basic logic. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus ripped the thick white envelope in half. He tore the legal divorce papers into tiny pieces and let them fall like snow onto the expensive hardwood floor. He dropped to his knees and pulled Chloe into a tight embrace, promising her that everything would be okay. A few minutes later, my cell phone buzzed quietly on my dining table. I picked it up and read the short text message flashing brightly across the screen. It was from Marcus. "Mom, I am so sorry, but Chloe is pregnant. I tore up the divorce papers. I cannot abandon my unborn child. I have to protect my family. Please try to understand." I read the pathetic message twice, feeling the last remaining shred of maternal sympathy evaporate completely from my heart. He had chosen the lie over the truth once again. He had sealed his own terrible fate. I typed my response with steady, calm fingers and hit send without a single second of hesitation. "Then protect them on your own." I placed the phone face down on the polished wood of my dining table, completely cutting off any further communication with my son. He had made his definitive choice. Now he would have to face the devastating consequences of that choice without my protection or my immense financial resources. Sometimes the most painful thing a parent can do is step back and let their child fall completely flat on their face. The Kensingtons thought they had won a temporary victory today, but they had absolutely no idea that their entire world was about to collapse around them. Have you ever had to walk away from a family member who refused to save themselves? Let me know your experiences in the comments section below, and make sure to subscribe so you do not miss the absolute destruction that is coming next. The 30 days of the eviction notice had officially expired. Chloe and Marcus had spent the entire month living in a complete state of absolute denial. Chloe refused to pack a single box. She honestly believed that her mother would somehow magically produce the funds to save their luxurious lifestyle, or that I would eventually cave to my son's emotional manipulation. She spent her days lounging by the heated swimming pool and drinking expensive wine, pretending that the legal document sitting on her kitchen counter was nothing more than a bad joke. Marcus, on the other hand, knew exactly what was coming. He had tried multiple times to convince his wife to start packing their belongings, but she would just scream at him and throw things across the room. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, completely paralyzed by his own weakness. He had chosen to stay with a woman who respected him only for the money he pretended to have, and now that the money was gone, he was seeing her true, terrifying colors. On the morning of the eviction, the sky over the gated community in Atlanta was heavy with dark gray clouds. I did not stay home to wait for the news. I instructed my driver to park my black town car across the street from the massive $5 million estate. I sat comfortably in the back seat, sipping a hot coffee and watching the entire scene unfold through the tinted windows. I wanted to witness the exact moment when the heavy consequences of their terrible choices finally crashed down upon their heads. At exactly 8 in the morning, a line of heavy vehicles turned onto the quiet, manicured street. 2 large white moving trucks, followed closely by 3 marked police cruisers from the county sheriff's department, pulled up into the long circular driveway of the mansion. The heavy doors of the police cruisers opened, and 4 uniformed deputies stepped out onto the pristine driveway. They were accompanied by 2 sharply dressed corporate attorneys from my private legal team holding thick black briefcases. The lead deputy walked up the wide stone steps and banged his heavy fist against the solid oak front door. The sound echoed loudly across the quiet, wealthy neighborhood, drawing the attention of several nosy neighbors who began peeking through their expensive silk curtains. It took 3 minutes of continuous knocking before the front door finally swung open. Chloe stood in the doorway wearing a pink silk robe and holding a steaming mug of expensive coffee. Her annoyed expression instantly vanished the second she saw the armed law enforcement officers standing on her front porch. "Ma'am, we are here to execute a court-ordered eviction," the lead deputy stated in a loud, firm voice. "You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your immediate personal belongings and vacate the premises before the moving company begins clearing the property." Chloe dropped her coffee mug. The ceramic shattered against the stone porch, sending hot liquid splashing across her bare feet. She let out a piercing, dramatic scream that could be heard all the way from my parked car. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, backing away into the grand foyer. "This is my house. My husband bought this house. You have no right to be here." The deputy did not flinch. He simply stepped inside the house and handed her the final court order signed by a federal judge. Marcus ran down the grand, sweeping staircase wearing wrinkled pajamas and looking absolutely terrified. He saw the police officers and immediately knew that his mother had kept her promise. He tried to grab Chloe's arm to pull her back, but she forcefully shoved him away. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out her smartphone. Her survival instincts kicked in, and she immediately went into full victim mode. She opened her social media application and started a live video broadcast, pointing the camera directly at the confused police officers. "Help me!" she cried into the camera, forcing heavy tears to stream down her face. "My evil mother-in-law is illegally throwing me out of my own home. The police are here and they are traumatizing me while I am pregnant. Please, someone call the news stations. Look at how they are treating a pregnant woman in her own home." The deputies ignored her completely theatrical performance. They signaled the movers, who immediately began marching into the massive house, carrying stacks of heavy cardboard boxes and rolls of packing tape. Chloe continued to run around the living room, screaming into her phone and trying to physically block the movers from touching her expensive designer furniture. Marcus just stood in the center of the room with his head bowed in absolute shame. He did not try to stop the movers, and he did not try to comfort his hysterical wife. He simply walked upstairs to pack his clothes, knowing that the battle was completely lost. Just as the movers began carrying the first load of boxes out the front door, a sleek silver luxury sedan sped up the driveway and slammed on its brakes. Brenda Kensington jumped out of the car before it was even fully in park. She was followed closely by a tall man in an expensive gray suit holding a leather portfolio. Brenda marched up the stone steps, looking like a furious general preparing for war. "Stop what you are doing immediately!" Brenda screamed at the police officers, waving her arms wildly in the air. "I demand that you halt this illegal eviction right now. This is my attorney, Mr. Harrison, and he is filing a massive countersuit against Desiree Washington for emotional distress and illegal property seizure. You are all going to lose your jobs for participating in this completely ridiculous sham." The tall attorney puffed out his chest and walked confidently up to the lead deputy. He demanded to see the legal paperwork authorizing the eviction. One of the corporate attorneys from my personal legal team stepped forward and calmly handed Mr. Harrison a thick stack of verified legal documents. These documents included the original property deed, the ironclad trust agreement, and the final eviction order signed and completely verified by the highest court in the county. Mr. Harrison adjusted his expensive glasses and began to read the papers. I watched from my car as the arrogant confidence slowly drained out of the tall lawyer's face. He flipped through the pages, reading the undeniable proof that my financial trust owned every single inch of the property and that Marcus had absolutely no legal claim to the estate whatsoever. Mr. Harrison closed the leather portfolio and handed the documents back to my attorney. He turned to Brenda, who was still screaming threats at the moving crew. "Mrs. Kensington," Mr. Harrison said, his voice completely devoid of his previous arrogance, "I cannot help you with this matter. The legal documents are completely bulletproof. The DW Trust is the sole legal owner of this property, and they have followed every single required legal protocol to execute this eviction. If you try to fight this in court, you will be completely destroyed, and I will not risk my professional license on a case that is impossible to win." Brenda stared at her expensive lawyer in absolute shock. "What are you talking about?" she yelled. "I am paying you $500 an hour. Do your job and stop these people from taking my daughter's house." Mr. Harrison simply shook his head and walked quickly back to his silver luxury sedan. He got into the car and drove away, leaving Brenda standing completely alone on the front porch with her mouth hanging wide open. The ultimate realization that she had absolutely no power left had finally hit her. The deputies stepped forward and instructed Brenda and Chloe to step off the property immediately. Chloe refused to move, still holding her phone and crying loudly to her social media followers. Two female deputies had to physically grab her by the arms and escort her down the driveway toward the street. Marcus followed closely behind them, dragging two large, heavy suitcases filled with their remaining clothes. The reality of the situation was absolute and undeniable. The wealthy socialite who had treated everyone around her like garbage was now standing on the public sidewalk in her silk robe, crying over a pile of luggage. Her wealthy neighbors stood on their perfectly manicured lawns, watching the entire humiliating spectacle unfold. Brenda stood next to her daughter, shaking with uncontrollable rage and profound embarrassment. They had lost the house, the money, and their precious high society reputation in a single devastating morning. I rolled down the tinted window of my town car, just enough to hear the final desperate words pouring out of Chloe's mouth. She stood on the curb surrounded by her suitcases and pointed her manicured finger toward my corporate attorneys standing on the porch. "You think you have won?" she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with insane desperation. "You think you can just throw us away like trash? But you are wrong. My family is untouchable. My mom's company is getting a $50 million bailout tomorrow morning. We are going to have more money than you could ever dream of. You will pay for this, you miserable people. You will absolutely pay for everything you have done to us." I smiled a slow, satisfied smile in the dark interior of my car. I rolled the window up, completely shutting out the sound of her pathetic screaming. Chloe was clinging to the false hope of a $50 million bailout because Brenda had lied to her yet again. Brenda had told her daughter that a mysterious private equity firm was going to save their bankrupt empire. What neither of those foolish, toxic women realized was that the mysterious private equity firm throwing them that imaginary $50 million lifeline was actually my own company. They were walking straight into the jaws of a massive financial shark, and they were completely blind to the danger. I instructed my driver to pull away from the curb, leaving them standing in the dust. The real game was only just beginning. The morning after the humiliating eviction, Brenda Kensington woke up in a standard suite at a mid-tier hotel. She despised the cheap synthetic sheets and the smell of industrial cleaning supplies. Her daughter Chloe was asleep on the sofa, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. Brenda refused to let the reality of her complete financial ruin sink in. Today was the most important day of her life. She had a scheduled meeting with a mysterious private equity firm that had recently reached out to her crumbling real estate empire. The firm had expressed interest in a massive $50 million bailout package. Brenda completely believed that this was her ultimate salvation, and that her superior business intellect had finally attracted the right kind of elite investors. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on her face and practicing her confident billionaire smile. She carefully applied her expensive makeup, using heavy foundation to hide the dark circles under her tired eyes. She put on her best-tailored cream-colored suit and her authentic pearl necklace, trying to project an image of absolute stability and immense power. She needed these investors to believe that the Kensington Group was simply experiencing a minor cash flow problem and not completely drowning in predatory debt. She left Chloe sleeping in the hotel room and ordered a luxury car service using the very last bit of credit available on her emergency backup card. She rode into downtown Atlanta, looking out the tinted windows at the towering glass skyscrapers. She felt a surge of arrogant pride returning to her chest. She was Brenda Kensington, and she was about to secure $50 million and completely destroy anyone who had ever doubted her. The car pulled up to a massive modern office building constructed of dark reflective glass and polished steel. Brenda stepped out of the vehicle and walked through the revolving doors with her head held incredibly high. The lobby was a massive cavern of white marble and minimalist modern art. She approached the sleek front desk and gave her name to the security guard. The guard checked her identification and directed her to a private express elevator reserved strictly for top-tier executives. The elevator shot up to the top floor of the building where the private equity firm was located. Brenda stepped out into a stunning reception area that smelled of fresh, expensive coffee and quiet authority. A professional young woman greeted her immediately and led her down a long, silent hallway toward the main executive boardroom. The boardroom was absolutely intimidating. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city of Atlanta. In the center of the room sat a massive table made of solid dark walnut, surrounded by ergonomic leather chairs. Standing near the window was a tall, sharp-looking man in a flawless navy blue suit. He turned around as Brenda entered, offering a polite but completely unreadable smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Kensington," he said, gesturing toward a chair at the center of the long table. "My name is Mr. Caldwell, and I am the lead acquisition director for this firm. Please have a seat so we can discuss the future of your family business." Brenda sat down, placing her expensive leather portfolio on the table, trying to look completely relaxed and in control of the situation. Mr. Caldwell sat directly across from her, opening a thick silver folder. He did not offer any small talk or pleasantries. He immediately began listing the catastrophic financial failures of the Kensington Group, reading off the massive debts, the unpaid vendor invoices, and the fraudulent loan activities with absolute chilling precision. Brenda felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. How did he know all of this? The level of detail he possessed was terrifying. She tried to interrupt him, offering weak excuses about market fluctuations and temporary liquid capital shortages. But Mr. Caldwell simply held up his hand, demanding absolute silence. "We are fully aware of your desperate situation, Mrs. Kensington," he said, his voice flat and professional. "We know that you have absolutely zero leverage and that federal authorities are likely weeks away from an investigation." Brenda swallowed hard, her throat suddenly feeling incredibly dry. She folded her hands in her lap, trying to stop them from shaking. "If you know how bad it is, why are you offering me $50 million?" she asked, her voice losing all of its previous arrogant strength. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wooden table. "Because the real estate assets your company holds still have significant underlying value if they are managed correctly," he explained smoothly. "We are willing to clear your massive debts, pay off your predatory lenders, and inject $50 million into the corporate accounts to completely stabilize the infrastructure." Brenda let out a long breath of relief. She felt a massive weight lift off her shoulders. She smiled confidently, believing she had successfully navigated the storm and won the ultimate prize. "But there are incredibly strict conditions," Mr. Caldwell continued, sliding a thick legal contract across the table toward her. "We are not a charity, Mrs. Kensington. We are a highly aggressive private equity firm. If we are taking on this massive level of toxic risk, we require absolute control over the entire operation." Brenda looked down at the contract and began to read the highlighted terms. Her eyes widened in absolute shock, and her heart began to pound violently against her ribs. The contract demanded that she surrender 51% of all voting shares in the Kensington Group immediately. She would be completely stripped of her absolute authority and reduced to a minority shareholder in her own family legacy. But the next clause was even more devastating than the loss of her corporate power. To secure this high-risk capital injection, you must pledge every single piece of your remaining personal assets as collateral, Mr. Caldwell stated clearly, watching her face completely crumble. "That includes your personal bank accounts, your luxury vehicles, your jewelry collections, and the private deeds to any remaining residential properties held in your name. If the company fails to meet our aggressive quarterly profit targets, we have the absolute legal right to seize everything you own without a lengthy court process." Brenda stared at the paper, completely horrified. "You are asking me to sign away my entire life?" she whispered, her voice shaking with genuine fear. "You are asking me to risk everything my father built and everything I currently possess. This is not a bailout. This is a complete hostile takeover." Mr. Caldwell did not flinch. He simply tapped his expensive pen against the silver folder. "It is exactly a hostile takeover, Mrs. Kensington," he agreed calmly, "but it is also your absolute last and only option. You can sign this contract today and walk away with a stabilized company and a chance to rebuild your wealth. Or you can walk out that door right now and face federal prison when the predatory lenders come looking for their $25 million. You have absolutely no other investors waiting in the lobby. You have no friends left to borrow from. You are completely out of time and out of choices. I need your final answer right now." Brenda looked out the massive windows at the city below, feeling completely and utterly trapped. She thought about Chloe crying in the cheap hotel room. She thought about the utter humiliation of standing on the sidewalk in front of her wealthy neighbors. She thought about the very real, terrifying threat of federal prison and the forged signature she had created to secure that predatory loan. She was backed into a dark corner with a loaded gun pointed directly at her head, and this ruthless corporate contract was the only possible shield available. She picked up the heavy black pen sitting next to the document. Her hand trembled violently as she slowly moved the pen toward the signature line at the bottom of the page. She closed her eyes for a brief second, taking a deep breath of the cold, air-conditioned room, and then she signed her name. She signed away 51% of her family legacy. She signed away her cars, her hidden accounts, and the last shred of her personal security. She pressed so hard that the pen nearly tore through the thick, expensive paper. When she was finished, she pushed the contract back across the table toward Mr. Caldwell. She felt completely hollow inside, but also entirely relieved that the immediate threat of prison had been temporarily resolved. "It is done," she said, her voice completely exhausted and weak. "I signed the contract. The Kensington Group is now officially under your majority control. Please initiate the wire transfers immediately so I can pay off those dangerous lenders. I need this nightmare to be over today." Mr. Caldwell picked up the contract, examining her signature carefully to ensure it was completely legitimate and legally binding. He closed the thick silver folder and offered her a bright, chilling smile. "Excellent decision, Mrs. Kensington," he said, standing up from his leather chair and buttoning his navy blue suit jacket. "You have completely secured your immediate future and finalized the transition of power. Now there is just one final formality we need to address before you leave today. Our Chief Executive Officer has been personally monitoring this specific acquisition for quite some time. She is incredibly invested in the complete restructuring of your family empire, and she specifically requested to meet you the absolute second this contract was signed." Brenda frowned, feeling a sudden sharp spike of fresh anxiety in her chest. She had assumed Mr. Caldwell was the highest authority in the room. She quickly tried to fix her posture and smooth the wrinkles in her cream-colored suit. She desperately needed to make a good impression on the person who now held her entire financial life in their hands. She pasted her fake billionaire smile back onto her face, waiting eagerly for the mysterious wealthy executive to enter the boardroom. "I would be absolutely honored to meet the Chief Executive Officer," Brenda said, completely trying to sound confident and professional. "I am very much looking forward to a long and mutually beneficial relationship with your elite firm." Mr. Caldwell nodded and looked toward the heavy double mahogany doors at the far end of the boardroom. He reached into his pocket and pressed a small silver button on a remote control. The automatic doors clicked loudly, unlocking with a heavy, satisfying sound, and began to swing open slowly. The bright light from the hallway spilled into the dark boardroom, illuminating the figure standing in the doorway. Brenda stood up from her chair, ready to extend her hand in a warm professional greeting. She expected to see an old wealthy white man or a ruthless corporate veteran. She absolutely never in her wildest nightmares expected to see the person who actually stepped through those heavy wooden doors. The Chief Executive Officer walked confidently into the massive room, the heels of her expensive shoes clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She was wearing a perfectly tailored dark burgundy power suit that radiated absolute authority and immense untouchable wealth. Her posture was flawless, and her expression was completely cold and utterly terrifying. Brenda Kensington felt her heart stop completely in her chest. The fake smile violently melted off her face, replaced by a mask of absolute pure, unadulterated horror. She could not breathe, and she could not speak. The woman walking toward her, the mysterious private equity shark, who had just legally acquired everything she owned, was none other than Desiree Washington. Brenda stood frozen as the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Her right hand was halfway extended in a gesture of professional greeting, but it dropped limply to her side as if all the bones had suddenly vanished. Her fingers brushed against the crystal water glass sitting on the edge of the polished walnut table. The glass tipped over and crashed onto the marble floor, sending sharp shards of crystal and freezing cold water splashing across the expensive leather of her designer shoes. She did not even flinch at the loud, shattering sound. Her wide, terrified eyes were locked completely on the woman walking into the boardroom. It was me, Desiree Washington, the woman Brenda had openly mocked at the Thanksgiving dinner table. The woman she had called poor ghetto and completely low class. I was not wearing a simple cardigan or carrying a homemade pecan pie today. I was wearing a custom-tailored dark burgundy power suit that radiated absolute financial dominance. Every single step I took echoed with the undeniable weight of true, untouchable wealth. Mr. Caldwell immediately stood up straight and quickly buttoned his navy blue suit jacket, bowing his head slightly in a gesture of absolute profound respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "The acquisition contract has been signed and fully executed. The Kensington Group is now officially under your absolute majority control." Brenda felt all the air completely leave her lungs. Her face turned the color of pale chalk, and her knees began to visibly tremble. The pristine corporate boardroom suddenly felt like a rapidly shrinking cage. "This is a joke," she whispered, her voice shaking so violently it was barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "This has to be some kind of sick, elaborate joke. You are a nobody. You are a widow from a working-class neighborhood. You do not own a massive private equity firm. You cannot possibly be the chief executive officer of this company." I did not rush to answer her frantic accusations. I walked slowly and deliberately to the head of the massive conference table, taking the ultimate seat of power. I comfortably adjusted my suit jacket and looked directly down the length of the long wooden table at Brenda. She looked like a pathetic, broken shell of the arrogant woman who had stood on my front porch just a few days ago threatening to send my son to federal prison. "Please sit down, Brenda," I commanded, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any pity. "You look like you are about to faint, and we have a significant amount of corporate business to discuss today." Brenda collapsed heavily into the ergonomic leather chair, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked over at the thick silver folder sitting in front of Mr. Caldwell, the folder that contained the legal document she had just signed. "You tricked me," Brenda stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You deliberately set me up. You used this fake company to steal my family legacy." I folded my hands neatly on the polished wood. "I did not set you up, Brenda," I replied smoothly. "My firm has been quietly acquiring distressed real estate assets in Atlanta for the past 7 years. Your failing company just happened to pop up on our financial radar. When I realized that my own daughter-in-law was tied to a bankrupt, crumbling empire, I decided to take a much closer look at your books. And what I found was absolutely disgusting. You have been financially drowning for a decade. You have been lying to your country club friends, lying to your daughter, and lying to the federal government. I simply offered you the exact bailout you were begging for. It is not my fault that you were too desperate and too incredibly foolish to read the fine print or ask who actually owned the firm." Brenda began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest, as the terrifying reality of her situation completely washed over her. She had willingly handed over 51% of her company to the exact woman she had tried to destroy. But the nightmare was only just beginning for her. She tried to muster a tiny shred of her previous arrogant defiance. "Well, congratulations, Desiree," she spat, her voice dripping with bitter resentment. "You bought a failing company. You spent $50 million just to get back at me for a dinner party argument. That makes you just as foolish as you think I am. But I am still the chief executive officer of the Kensington Group. I still have a massive salary, and I still run the daily operations. You might own the majority shares, but you still have to deal with me every single day." I let out a soft, genuine laugh that echoed coldly through the boardroom. "Oh, Brenda, you really do not understand how the high-stakes corporate world actually works, do you?" I asked, shaking my head in mild amusement. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my smartphone. I placed it gently on the table and tapped the screen. "You see, Brenda, when my firm acquires a new company, we require the existing leadership to pass a rigorous background check to ensure they are legally fit to run the corporation. And unfortunately for you, your background check raised a few massive, catastrophic red flags." I pressed the play button on my audio application. The crystal-clear recording from my living room filled the silent boardroom. Brenda's own arrogant voice echoed through the speakers, loud and undeniable. "It does not matter if he actually wanted to sign it, Desiree. The signature is on paper. He did not need to be in the room. I signed the damn papers myself. It was incredibly easy to forge his signature. So yes, I forged his name on a $25 million federal loan document, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to prove it." I stopped the recording and let the absolute crushing silence stretch across the room for several long seconds. Brenda stared at the phone as if it were a live, explosive device. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Mr. Caldwell slid a second manila folder across the table toward her. "That folder contains the physical evidence of your massive corporate wire fraud," I explained coldly. "We have the forged loan documents, the fake notary stamps, and the digital paper trail proving that you personally executed the illegal transfer of funds. You committed felony identity theft against my son to save your pathetic public image." Brenda began to quietly sob, covering her face with her shaking hands. "Please," she begged, her voice muffled by her tears. "Please do not give that to the police. I will do whatever you want. I will walk away from the company. I will give you everything. Just please do not send me to prison. I cannot survive in a place like that. You do not understand the pressure I was under. I had to keep the family name intact. I had to protect Chloe. You did not protect anyone, Brenda, I stated firmly, cutting off her pathetic excuses. You used everyone around you like disposable pawns, and now the game is entirely over. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the thick contract sitting on the table. When you signed this agreement today, you agreed to all the standard operational clauses required by my firm. One of those clauses is a strict morality and legal compliance clause. It clearly states that if any executive officer is found to be involved in illegal, fraudulent, or highly unethical behavior, their employment is terminated immediately with absolute zero severance or compensation. I stood up from my leather chair and leaned over the massive wooden table, looking directly down into her terrified, sobbing face. You committed massive federal fraud, Brenda. Therefore, you are in direct violation of the morality clause you just signed 5 minutes ago. I am officially activating that clause right now. You are stripped of your title. You are stripped of your massive salary. And because you foolishly pledged all of your personal assets as collateral for this acquisition, my firm is legally seizing your bank accounts, your luxury cars, and the deed to your private residence to cover the immense damages caused by your fraudulent leadership. Brenda let out a loud, agonizing wail of pure despair. She reached out across the table as if trying to grab the contract back, but Mr. Caldwell quickly pulled the silver folder away. You called me low-class Brenda, I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying whisper that cut straight through her dramatic sobbing. You sat at a Thanksgiving table and told me that I was a peasant who did not belong in your elite, wealthy world. You tried to humiliate me, and you tried to destroy my only son. Look at exactly where we are right now. I own your entire family legacy. I own your house. I own your money. Now you work for me, and you are officially fired. Get out of my building. Mr. Caldwell immediately pressed a button on his smartwatch, calling for the building security team. 2 large men in dark suits entered the boardroom within seconds. They grabbed Brenda by her arms and forcefully lifted her out of the ergonomic leather chair. She did not even try to fight them. Her legs completely gave out, and they had to practically drag her across the polished marble floor. She sobbed hysterically, her expensive cream-colored suit wrinkling and tearing slightly as she was pulled out of the massive double doors. I stood at the head of the table, watching her humiliating exit with absolute cold satisfaction. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind her, sealing her devastating fate completely. Brenda was dragged through the pristine corporate lobby and physically thrown out onto the hot, bustling sidewalks of downtown Atlanta. The harsh afternoon sun blinded her tear-filled eyes. She stumbled toward a concrete bench and collapsed onto the hard surface, completely destroyed. She had no money for a taxi. She had no access to her bank accounts. Her entire wealthy existence had been completely erased in less than 20 minutes. Her hands shook violently as she dug into her purse and pulled out her cell phone. She dialed her daughter's number, praying that Chloe would somehow pick up. Chloe answered on the 3rd ring, her voice sounding annoyed and impatient. "Mom, where are you?" she complained loudly. "We need to check out of this terrible hotel and go shopping to celebrate the bailout." Brenda gripped the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned completely white. Her chest heaved with heavy, agonizing sobs. "Chloe," she gasped, struggling to breathe through the absolute panic crushing her throat. "Chloe, it is over. The firm was owned by Desiree. She recorded me. She knows about the forged loan. She took the company and she fired me. We lost everything, Chloe. We have absolutely nothing left. The bank is foreclosing on my house today." The harsh reality of their new life hit Marcus and Chloe the moment they stepped into the damp, dimly lit room of the Economy Motel located on the absolute outskirts of Atlanta. The air inside the room smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial bleach. The carpet was stained with dark, unidentifiable spots, and the single fluorescent bulb flickering overhead cast a sickening yellow glow over the peeling wallpaper. This was a catastrophic fall from the $5 million mansion with its heated swimming pool and custom marble countertops. Marcus dropped their heavy suitcases onto the sagging mattress and sat down, rubbing his exhausted face with his trembling hands. Chloe did not sit down. She paced back and forth across the tiny room, her designer shoes sticking slightly to the filthy carpet. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, absolute rage. "How could you let this happen to us, Marcus?" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the thin motel walls. "How could you be so incredibly stupid and weak? You let your ghetto mother take everything from us. You promised me a life of luxury, and now I am standing in a room that looks like a crime scene. You are completely pathetic." Marcus closed his eyes, absorbing the vicious verbal abuse because he felt he deserved it. He had sacrificed his relationship with his mother, his career, and his entire financial future to protect this woman. He had believed her tears, and he had believed her pregnancy. But now, without the cushion of endless wealth, Chloe's true colors were shining through with blinding, terrifying clarity. She was not the loving, supportive wife she had pretended to be when his bank accounts were full. She was a vicious, calculating parasite who was furious that her host had suddenly run dry. "You need to call her back right now," Chloe demanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at his face. "You need to beg her for our money. Tell her about the baby again. Cry if you have to. Just get us out of this disgusting place before I lose my mind. I am a Kensington, and I absolutely refuse to live like a peasant." Marcus looked up at her, his eyes heavy with profound exhaustion. "I cannot call her Chloe," he said, his voice completely hollow. "She blocked my number. She cut me off completely. There is no more money, and there is no more trust fund. We have exactly $300 left in my emergency checking account, and that has to feed us for the rest of the week." Chloe grabbed a cheap plastic lamp from the nightstand and hurled it across the room. It shattered loudly against the far wall. "You are absolutely useless," she shrieked, her face turning a violent shade of crimson. "My mother is going to get her $50 million bailout tomorrow, and when she does, I am leaving you. You are a broke, pathetic loser, and I regret the day I ever met you." Marcus did not argue with her. He simply turned away, reaching for the television remote, sitting on the stained bedside table. He pressed the power button, desperate for any kind of background noise to drown out her relentless screaming. The old television buzzed loudly before the screen slowly flickered to life, tuning into the local Atlanta evening news broadcast. Marcus stared at the screen, and his heart completely stopped beating in his chest. The news anchor was speaking enthusiastically about a massive new philanthropic initiative launching in the city. The camera cut to a live press conference taking place on the front steps of the Atlanta City Hall. Standing at the podium, looking absolutely radiant and incredibly powerful in a tailored navy blue suit, was Desiree Washington, my mother. Standing directly next to her, smiling proudly and clapping his hands, was the mayor of Atlanta. A large banner hanging behind them read, "The Washington Foundation for Black Youth. Today, we honor a woman of extraordinary vision and unparalleled generosity," the mayor announced into the microphones. Desiree Washington has just personally endowed a $20 million scholarship fund to provide full university tuition for underprivileged Black youth across our great city. Her commitment to lifting up the next generation is a profound testament to her character and her incredible success. The camera zoomed in on my mother as she stepped up to the podium. She looked peaceful, confident, and completely unbothered by the absolute chaos she had left behind in my life. She smiled warmly, speaking eloquently about the importance of hard work, integrity, and building a legacy that truly matters. Marcus watched her on the small, grainy television screen, and a massive wave of soul-crushing regret washed over his entire body. He realized in that exact moment the absolute magnitude of what he had thrown away. He had the opportunity to be part of an incredible empire. He could have worked alongside his brilliant mother, building a legacy that actually helped people and commanded true respect. Instead, he had chosen to chase the shallow, empty validation of a racist high society family that used him as a human shield for their own fraudulent crimes. He had traded an empire of gold for a house of cheap cards, and now the cards had completely collapsed, leaving him buried under the rubble. Chloe stopped pacing and stared at the television screen. Her jaw dropped open in absolute horror as she realized the woman she had called poor and low class was currently standing next to the mayor, giving away $20 million to charity. "That is our money," Chloe screamed, lunging toward the television as if she could physically reach through the screen and grab the cash. "She is giving away our money to a bunch of ghetto kids. How can she do this to us when her own grandchild is going to be born into poverty? She is a monster, Marcus. Your mother is an absolute monster." Marcus looked away from the television and stared at his wife. He felt a strange, sudden clarity settling over his mind. The intense panic and fear that had controlled him for the past month slowly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, quiet resolve. He watched Chloe frantically pacing the room, cursing his mother, and completely obsessing over the lost wealth. She went into the bathroom to wash her face, leaving her expensive designer purse sitting open on the edge of the sagging bed. The purse tipped over, spilling its contents onto the stained blanket. A lipstick, a compact mirror, a set of keys, and a small plastic rectangular package slid out. Marcus frowned, reaching over to pick up the plastic package. It was a standard monthly blister pack of birth control pills. He looked at the foil backing. The pill for yesterday was completely popped out. The pill for today was also popped out. He stared at the package, his brain slowly processing the undeniable physical evidence resting in the palm of his hand. A pregnant woman absolutely does not take daily birth control pills. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. There was no baby. There had never been a baby. Chloe had completely invented the pregnancy standing in the living room of the mansion to prevent him from signing the divorce papers and leaving her. She had manipulated his deepest desire to be a father simply to keep her hands attached to his completely empty wallet. Chloe walked out of the bathroom, wiping her face with a cheap, scratchy towel. She saw Marcus sitting perfectly still on the edge of the bed, staring down at the pink plastic package in his hand. She froze completely, instantly, recognizing the item. The color drained from her face, and her eyes darted nervously around the small room. Marcus slowly looked up at her, his expression completely blank and devoid of any emotion. "You are not pregnant," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You lied to me. You made me tear up the divorce papers and abandon my own mother for a child that does not even exist. You manipulated me in the absolute worst way a person could ever manipulate a husband." Chloe crossed her arms defensively, trying to maintain her arrogant posture, but her voice trembled violently. "So what if I did?" she snapped, completely abandoning the innocent victim routine. "I did what I had to do to survive. You were going to leave me with nothing. You owed me Marcus. You promised me a life of wealth, and you failed completely. I am not going to apologize for trying to secure my own future." Marcus did not yell. He did not throw anything. He simply placed the pack of birth control pills gently onto the nightstand. The immense anger he expected to feel was surprisingly absent. Instead, he just felt incredibly tired. He laid down on the uncomfortable bed, turning his back to her completely, ignoring her continued screaming and verbal abuse. Chloe yelled until her throat was sore, blaming him for her mother's ruined company for the eviction and for her own miserable life. Eventually, the sheer exhaustion of her own toxic emotions caught up with her. She laid down on the opposite side of the bed, pulling the thin blanket over her shoulders, and fell into a deep, heavy sleep. Marcus stayed awake, staring at the peeling wallpaper and listening to the sound of cars passing by on the dark highway outside. At exactly 2 a.m, Marcus quietly sat up. He moved silently across the dark room, gathering his clothes and packing them neatly into his single suitcase. He did not take any of the expensive watches or designer suits he had bought with his mother's money. He only packed the basic essentials. He zipped the suitcase shut, completely minimizing any noise. He walked over to the nightstand and pulled out his wallet. He took out the $300 in cash, placing it directly on the stained carpet. He did not leave her the money out of love or responsibility. He left it so she could not accuse him of stealing her last remaining lifeline. He walked to the door and paused, looking back at Chloe sleeping soundly in the dark, filthy motel room. She looked small, pathetic, and completely empty. She had absolutely nothing left. Her mother was fired, her company was gone, her mansion was repossessed, and now her husband was walking out the door. Marcus opened the heavy motel door, stepping out into the cool, humid Atlanta night air. He closed the door quietly behind him, leaving the keycard on the small table inside. He did not know exactly where he was going to go or how he was going to survive, but he knew with absolute certainty that he was finally completely free. He began walking down the dimly lit sidewalk, pulling his suitcase behind him. The sound of the rolling wheels echoed in the silent night. He had a long, difficult road ahead of him, but for the first time in 5 years, he was walking on his own 2 feet. Chloe Kensington would wake up tomorrow morning to find herself entirely alone, penniless, and completely trapped in the nightmare she had so carefully constructed. The empire she thought she ruled had entirely crumbled into dust, and she was the absolute queen of absolutely nothing. Let me know in the comments if you think Marcus deserved his freedom after everything he allowed his wife to do, and remember to subscribe to hear exactly how Chloe finally pays the ultimate price. The morning sun crept through the filthy curtains of the cheap motel room, casting a harsh light over the stained carpet. Chloe Kensington stirred under the thin, scratchy blanket, reaching her hand out across the mattress. She expected to feel the warmth of her husband, but her fingers brushed against nothing but empty space and cold sheets. She sat up quickly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes and looking around the small, depressing room. The space was completely silent. Marcus was gone. His suitcase was missing from the corner, and his shoes were no longer by the door. Panic instantly gripped her chest as she threw off the blanket and stood up. She walked over to the small nightstand, hoping he had just gone out to get them some breakfast or coffee. But instead of food, she found her pink plastic package of daily birth control pills sitting perfectly centered on the cheap wooden table. Next to the pills sat 3 crisp $100 bills. The physical evidence of her massive lie was staring her right in the face. Marcus had finally figured out the truth about her fake pregnancy, and he had abandoned her. She grabbed her cell phone with trembling hands and frantically dialed his number. The call immediately went straight to voicemail, proving that he had completely blocked her contact. She screamed in absolute frustration, throwing the phone onto the sagging bed. She was entirely alone in a disgusting motel room with only $300 to her name. She had no husband to manipulate and no wealth to hide behind. Her survival instincts kicked into high gear. She needed to get to her mother immediately. She believed Brenda would somehow fix this massive disaster and restore their luxurious lives. Chloe quickly threw her remaining designer clothes into her suitcase, completely ignoring the wrinkles. She did not bother taking a shower in the filthy bathroom. She grabbed the $300 from the nightstand and dragged her heavy luggage out into the humid morning air. Her luxury car had been repossessed the previous afternoon by the leasing company, leaving her completely stranded. She walked to the front office of the motel and paid a local taxi driver $50 to take her directly to the affluent neighborhood where her mother lived. She prayed her mother had a plan. The taxi ride felt incredibly long and agonizing. Chloe stared out the window, watching the scenery change from run-down buildings to the pristine, manicured lawns of the wealthy suburbs. The driver finally pulled into the familiar, upscale neighborhood and stopped in front of Brenda's massive brick colonial house. Chloe handed the driver his cash and dragged her suitcase out onto the pristine sidewalk. The taxi drove away, leaving her standing in the quiet morning air. She turned toward the house, expecting to see her mother's luxury sedan parked in the wide driveway, but the driveway was completely empty. She walked up the long stone pathway, dragging her heavy luggage behind her. As she got closer to the grand front entrance, she noticed something was terribly wrong. A massive heavy metal padlock was secured tightly across the beautiful oak front doors. Taped directly to the polished wood was a bright yellow legal notice from a major federal bank. Chloe dropped her suitcase on the porch and stepped closer to read the bold black letters printed on the paper. It was a formal notice of immediate foreclosure and absolute property seizure due to catastrophic default on corporate loans. Chloe felt her knees grow weak. Her mother had lost the house. The $50 million bailout was a complete lie. She backed away from the locked door, her mind spinning in absolute terror. She heard a soft rustling sound coming from the side of the property. She walked slowly toward the edge of the large wraparound porch and peered around the corner of the brick wall. Sitting on the hard concrete driveway next to 3 black plastic garbage bags was Brenda Kensington. The former high society chairwoman looked absolutely, completely, and utterly destroyed beyond any recognition. Brenda was wearing the same cream-colored suit from yesterday, but it was now heavily wrinkled and stained with dirt. Her perfect blonde hair was a messy, tangled disaster, and her expensive makeup was completely smeared down her cheeks from hours of crying. She was sitting on the cold ground, clutching a single framed photograph to her chest. Chloe stared at her mother in sheer disbelief. The powerful, arrogant woman who had dictated every aspect of their wealthy lives was now sitting next to bags of trash, looking like a helpless vagrant on the streets of the city. "Mom," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with shock and profound fear. "What happened to the house? Where is all your stuff?" Brenda slowly looked up from the concrete driveway. Her eyes were bloodshot and filled with a dark, venomous anger. She stared at her daughter, not with love or maternal concern, but with absolute, pure, unadulterated hatred. She slowly stood up, dropping the framed photograph onto the ground. The glass shattered, but she did not even blink. "What happened?" Brenda hissed, her voice raspy and bitter. "I will tell you exactly what happened to my entire wealthy life. Your pathetic mother-in-law happened," Brenda screamed, taking a threatening step toward Chloe. "Desiree Washington owned that private equity firm. She orchestrated the entire bailout just to trap me. She activated a morality clause and fired me from my own family company. She legally seized my bank accounts, she took my cars, and she sent the bank to lock me out of my own home this morning. I have absolutely nothing left, Chloe. I am completely bankrupt, and the federal authorities are probably building a massive fraud case against me right now as we stand here." Chloe gasped, physically taking a step backward. "Desiree!" She repeated, her brain struggling to process the absolute magnitude of the terrifying revelation. "She owns the private equity firm, too. How is that even possible, Mom?" "It is possible because we were arrogant and stupid," Brenda shrieked, pointing a shaking finger directly at Chloe's face. "And this is entirely your fault. Every single bit of this massive disaster rests completely squarely on your selfish, narrow shoulders. If you had just behaved like a normal human being at that stupid Thanksgiving dinner, none of this would have ever happened. If you had just shut your mouth and apologized to that woman, we would not be on the street right now," Brenda yelled, her voice echoing loudly through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. "You just had to prove how superior you were. You had to throw her out of a house she actually owned. You completely destroyed this family with your endless entitlement." Chloe felt a sudden surge of defensive rage boiling in her chest. She refused to take the blame for her mother's massive criminal failures. She dropped her purse and stepped closer to her furious, screaming mother. "Do not you dare blame this on me," Chloe screamed back, her face turning a violent shade of red. "I did not force you to bankrupt the family business. I did not make you borrow $25 million from predatory lenders. And I absolutely did not forge Marcus' signature on a federal loan document. You are a criminal mom. You lied to everyone, and you built our entire life on a massive, fragile mountain of completely illegal debt. Desiree simply pushed you off the edge. You ruined your own life, and you dragged me down with you." The two women stood in the driveway, viciously tearing each other apart. They screamed terrible, unforgivable insults at one another, completely destroying whatever shred of a relationship they had left. The wealthy neighbors they had once tried so desperately to impress were now standing on their porches, openly watching the humiliating public screaming match. Finally, Brenda let out a sound of pure disgust. She grabbed her 3 plastic garbage bags and turned her back on her daughter. "I have no daughter anymore," Brenda spat, walking away down the street and leaving Chloe completely alone in the driveway. Chloe watched her mother walk away until she disappeared around the corner. She was completely broken. She had no money, no family, no husband, and no home. The immense weight of her absolute failure crushed her spirit entirely. She sat down on her heavy suitcase and wept uncontrollably. But as the sun beat down on her, she realized she had one single, desperate option left: She remembered an address she had seen on the trust documents, a massive hidden estate located miles outside the city limits. Utterly desperate, she swallowed her pride and began the long, humiliating walk. She dragged her expensive suitcase over the rough sidewalks, feeling blisters forming on her heels. The sun beat down on her, making her sweat through her designer clothing. Cars drove past her, splashing dirty puddles onto her legs, but she did not stop. She was marching toward the woman she had despised, hoping for mercy. She knew she had to beg on her knees and surrender everything. Let me know in the comments if you think Chloe deserves forgiveness after all she has done, and subscribe to hear the final conclusion. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the hot concrete sidewalks of the city as Chloe Kensington continued her agonizing journey. She had been walking for over 3 hours, dragging her heavy designer suitcase behind her. The expensive leather material of her shoes, which had only ever graced the soft carpets of country clubs and high-end boutiques, was now scuffed and completely ruined. Massive, painful blisters had formed on her heels, with every single step sending sharp, agonizing shocks of pain up her legs. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was now matted to her forehead with thick, heavy sweat. Her designer clothes were completely soaked and covered in a fine layer of gray street dust. Cars continuously sped past her on the busy highway, completely ignoring the desperate, broken woman walking on the shoulder of the road. She had no water, and she had absolutely no pride left. The only thing keeping her moving forward was the absolute terrifying realization that she had nowhere else to go. Her mother had completely disowned her, and her husband had abandoned her in a filthy motel room. The empire she thought she ruled was completely gone. The only person left in the entire world who possessed the power and the immense wealth to save her was the exact woman she had treated like absolute garbage. She was walking toward my private hidden estate, a massive residential compound located deep within the lush green hills just outside the city limits. It was a property she had never seen because she had always assumed I lived in a tiny, rundown apartment. When Chloe finally reached the exact address listed on the property documents, she stopped and stared in absolute, total disbelief. She had expected to find a modest suburban house, but instead she found herself standing in front of massive, towering wrought iron security gates. The gates were flanked by high stone walls that stretched endlessly in both directions, completely hiding the estate from the public road. Behind the walls, she could see the tops of ancient oak trees and the sweeping roofline of a residential compound that easily rivaled the most exclusive billionaire estates in the country. This was true, untouchable wealth. This was the empire I had built quietly and methodically over 3 decades. Chloe felt a sickening wave of profound realization wash over her entire body. She had spent the last 5 years acting like royalty in a $5 million house, while her mother-in-law secretly owned a massive fortress. Her knees buckled under the immense weight of her own absolute foolishness. She stumbled forward toward the heavy iron gates and pressed her hand against the cold metal. Next to the gate was a sleek black security intercom system equipped with a high-definition camera. Chloe dropped her heavy suitcase onto the dirt shoulder. She fell to her knees right there in the dust, directly in front of the camera lens. She reached up with trembling hands and pressed the silver call button over and over again. I was sitting comfortably in my private home office, reviewing the final transition documents for the Kensington Group acquisition, when my security monitors chimed softly. I looked up at the large flat screen mounted on my wall, which displayed the live camera feeds from all around my property. There on the main gate, camera was Chloe. She looked absolutely pathetic. She was on her knees clutching the metal bars of the gate, sobbing hysterically into the intercom microphone. "Please," she cried, her voice cracking and distorted through the external speakers. "Please let me in. It is me, Chloe. I know you are in there, Desiree. I have absolutely nowhere else to go. Please do not leave me out here on the street." I watched her for several long minutes, sipping my herbal tea and feeling absolutely no sympathy for the woman crying on my screen. This was the exact same woman who had pointed her finger at me and demanded I get out of her house. This was the woman who had faked a pregnancy to manipulate my son and trap him in a miserable marriage. I could have easily ignored her. I could have called the local police and had her arrested for trespassing on private property. But true justice requires the guilty party to fully understand the absolute magnitude of their own destruction. I reached across my large mahogany desk and pressed the silver button to open the main security gates. The massive wrought iron gates clicked loudly and began to slowly swing open on their heavy motorized hinges. Chloe gasped in shock, wiping the dirty tears from her face. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed the handle of her ruined suitcase, and practically ran through the opening before the gates could close again. She dragged her luggage up the long, winding driveway, which was perfectly paved and lined with beautiful manicured gardens and stunning water features. The sheer scale of the property was absolutely breathtaking. When she finally reached the top of the driveway, the main house came into full view. It was a spectacular modern mansion constructed of sleek glass, natural stone, and dark wood. Standing at the massive double-glass front doors waiting for her was my executive assistant, Elena. Elena looked at Chloe's ruined, sweaty appearance with an expression of polite, professional disdain. "Mrs. Washington is waiting for you in her private office," Elena said smoothly, turning around and walking into the grand foyer. Chloe followed her like a frightened, obedient dog, completely terrified to touch anything or make a sound. The interior of my home was a masterpiece of quiet, elegant luxury, completely devoid of the gaudy, flashy trash Brenda Kensington used to decorate her house. Elena opened the heavy wooden doors to my office and stepped aside, allowing Chloe to enter the room. I was sitting behind my desk wearing a comfortable but elegant silk blouse, resting my hands calmly on the smooth leather surface. Chloe stepped into the room and immediately burst into fresh, violent tears. She let go of her suitcase, letting it crash onto the floor, and completely threw herself across the room. She dropped to her knees right in front of my desk, burying her face in her dirty hands. "I am so incredibly sorry," she sobbed loudly, rocking back and forth on her knees. "I am so sorry for everything I have ever done to you, Desiree. You have to believe me. I was completely brainwashed. I was manipulated by my own mother. Brenda is an absolute monster. She made me do all those terrible things. She made me act like a snob because she was so incredibly jealous of you. She is the one who ruined everything. Please, you have to forgive me." I looked down at the weeping woman, entirely disgusted by her total lack of personal accountability. Even now completely destroyed and begging for her life, she was still desperately trying to throw her own mother under the bus to save herself. I did not interrupt her. I let her continue her pathetic, desperate performance. Chloe looked up at me, her makeup completely smeared, and her eyes wide with manufactured terror. "Marcus left me last night," she cried, her voice trembling. "He walked out and left me in a disgusting motel room. I have absolutely no money and no family left. My mother threw me out on the street. You are the only family I have, Desiree. You are the best mother anyone could ever ask for. You raised such a wonderful son, and I was just too blind to see it. Please let me come back into the family. I swear I will change. I will do absolutely whatever you want me to do. I will be your personal servant. I will clean your massive house. I will cook your meals. I will do anything you ask. Just please do not leave me to die out there on the streets. You are a good person, Desiree. You are a woman of faith. Please show me mercy." She reached her hands out, trying to grab the edge of my desk, but I slowly rolled my heavy leather chair backward, just completely out of her desperate reach. The silence in the grand office was incredibly heavy, broken only by the sound of her loud, pathetic, gasping breaths. I looked at her for a very long time, studying the absolute desperation swimming in her blue eyes. She actually believed she could cry her way out of the massive hole she had dug for herself. She believed that her tears and her dramatic apologies could suddenly erase years of vicious racism, absolute entitlement, and cruel manipulation. She thought I was weak enough to buy her pathetic victim routine. I reached into the top drawer of my desk and pulled out a small black remote control. I did not say a single word to her. I simply pointed the remote at the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall directly behind her and pressed the power button. The screen flashed to life instantly. Chloe stopped crying and slowly turned her head to look at the television. Playing on the screen in brilliant, high-definition color and crystal-clear audio was the security camera footage from the dining room of her former mansion. It was the exact footage from our disastrous Thanksgiving dinner. The video showed Chloe standing up from the beautifully decorated table, her face twisted in pure, ugly, arrogant rage. The audio filled my quiet office, echoing loudly off the walls. "How dare you come into my house, eat my food, and disrespect my mother like that? You are nothing but a jealous, bitter old woman who cannot stand the fact that your son upgraded his life. You will apologize to my mother right now. You will apologize to her, or you can get out of my house and never come back." I pressed the pause button on the remote, freezing the video exactly on her smug, victorious, screaming face. Chloe stared at the screen, completely paralyzed by the undeniable reality of her own horrific behavior. Her fake tears dried up instantly, replaced by a cold, terrible dread. I slowly leaned forward, resting my elbows on my heavy mahogany desk, and looked directly down into her terrified, wide eyes. I spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm, but completely filled with absolute freezing ice. "Do you remember what you said to me, Chloe?" I asked softly, watching her completely crumble. "Apologize or get out. And do you remember exactly what I said to you?" The silence in the grand office was absolutely deafening. The security footage from the Thanksgiving dinner had just finished playing on the massive flat-screen television mounted on the wall. My question hung heavily in the cold air of the room. "Do you remember what you said to me, Chloe? Apologize or get out. And do you remember exactly what I said to you?" Chloe remained frozen on her knees, staring at the blank television screen. Her chest heaved as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The pathetic tears that had been streaming down her face just moments ago suddenly stopped. She realized with absolute certainty that her victim routine had completely failed. The helpless daughter-in-law act was dead and buried. I had seen right through her transparent manipulation. Slowly, Chloe pushed herself up from the floor. She wiped her face with the back of her dirty hand, smearing her expensive makeup even further across her cheeks. As she stood up, the frightened, desperate expression on her face melted away. It was quickly replaced by the familiar ugly mask of arrogant entitlement that she had worn every single day of her adult life. She brushed the dust off her ruined designer clothes and lifted her chin, trying to summon whatever tiny shred of false superiority she still possessed. If she could not win my pity, she was going to demand my money. "Fine, Desiree." She snapped, her voice losing all of its previous fake sweetness and returning to a harsh, demanding tone. "You want to play hardball. We can absolutely play hardball. You might have taken my mother's company, and you might have taken the house, but you cannot leave me with nothing. I am still legally married to your son. Marcus is my husband, and we live in a state that recognizes marital assets." She took a step closer to my heavy mahogany desk, slamming her hands down onto the polished wood. "You think you have completely destroyed me, but you are forgetting the law. When I file for divorce tomorrow morning, I am legally entitled to exactly half of everything Marcus owns. Half of his massive stock portfolio, half of his corporate bank accounts, and half of his future earnings. You will be writing me a massive alimony check every single month for the rest of my life." Chloe smiled a vicious, triumphant smile. She actually believed she had found the ultimate loophole. She believed that her marriage certificate was a golden ticket that would guarantee her a lifetime of endless luxury at my personal expense. "You can kick me out of this office, but you will still be paying for my lifestyle," she gloated, laughing bitterly. "So go ahead and act tough, Desiree. It does not matter. I still win." I sat perfectly still in my heavy leather chair, watching her gloat. I did not feel angry. I did not feel threatened. I only felt a deep, profound sense of secondhand embarrassment for the incredibly foolish woman standing in front of me. I let her enjoy her imaginary victory for a few more seconds before I decided to completely shatter her entire reality for the final time. "Chloe, your mother raised you to be incredibly arrogant, but she clearly forgot to teach you how to read a legal document," I said smoothly. I slowly stood up from my chair and walked over to the tall metal filing cabinet standing in the corner of my office. I opened the heavy drawer and pulled out a pristine white folder. I walked back to my desk and dropped the folder directly in front of her. The thick stack of papers inside made a heavy, satisfying thud against the wood. "Do you recognize this document, Chloe?" I asked, resting my fingertips on the edge of the white folder. "Because you should. You signed it 5 years ago, on the beautiful sunny afternoon right before your lavish wedding." Chloe looked down at the folder. Her vicious smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. "It is our prenuptial agreement," she stated, crossing her arms defensively. "My mother made Marcus sign it to protect the Kensington family wealth. She wanted to make sure that if we ever got divorced, Marcus could not touch a single penny of my trust fund or the family company." "Exactly," I replied, nodding slowly. Brenda was so incredibly terrified that a black man from a working-class background was trying to steal her precious family fortune. She hired the most aggressive, expensive corporate lawyers in Atlanta to draft the most ironclad, ruthless prenuptial agreement in the history of family law. She demanded that all financial assets remain completely separate. She demanded that whatever Marcus brought into the marriage remained his, and whatever you brought into the marriage remained yours. There would be absolutely no shared marital property and no spousal support awarded to either party in the event of a divorce. She forced Marcus to sign it under the threat of canceling the wedding. Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, annoyed sigh. "Yes, Desiree, I know what a prenuptial agreement is, but my family has absolutely no wealth left to protect. You took everything from my mother. The prenup protects Marcus now. But it does not matter, because whatever he earned during our marriage is still considered his personal wealth, and I am taking half of his cash." I shook my head slowly, feeling a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. "You really do not understand how deep this trap goes, do you, Chloe?" I opened the white folder and flipped to the financial disclosure pages located near the back of the heavy document. "Let me explain the reality of your husband's finances to you. When Marcus asked me to help him buy that $5 million mansion, I knew exactly what kind of greedy, manipulative people he was marrying into. I knew Brenda would eventually try to bleed him dry, so I did not just buy the house through my private trust. I placed every single financial asset Marcus supposedly owned entirely under the legal umbrella of the DW Trust." Chloe frowned, staring at the complicated legal jargon printed on the pages. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice dropping to a nervous whisper. "It means," I explained, slowly making sure she heard every single devastating syllable, "that Marcus does not actually own anything. He does not own a massive stock portfolio. He does not own any corporate bank accounts. He does not even own the luxury car he drives to work every day. Every single dollar he has ever spent during your entire 5-year marriage was technically a carefully regulated allowance distributed directly from my private equity firm. On paper, legally speaking, your husband is completely broke. He is a financial ghost." The color rapidly drained from Chloe's face. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as the mathematical reality of her situation finally clicked into place. "Brenda drafted a prenuptial agreement to protect your massive wealth from my son." I continued, stepping around the desk and moving closer to her. "But your wealth was a complete illusion built on fraudulent debt. And because Brenda demanded that your assets remain totally separate, she completely blocked you from ever touching a single penny of my actual wealth." I picked up the heavy prenuptial agreement and held it right in front of her terrified face. "Marcus is filing for divorce today, Chloe. And because of this brilliant document your mother forced him to sign, the court will look at his financial assets, which are exactly zero. The court will then divide that zero completely in half. You are legally entitled to exactly 50% of absolutely nothing. You are walking away from this marriage with exactly $0. No alimony, no settlement, no luxury cars, no country club memberships, absolutely nothing." Chloe physically stumbled backward as if I had just struck her across the face. She bumped into the heavy leather guest chair, knocking it slightly off balance. Her breath came in short, rapid gasps. "No," she whispered, shaking her head frantically from side to side. "No, that cannot be true. You are lying. You are just trying to scare me. My lawyers will fight this. I will hire the best legal team in the state, and we will tear this prenup apart. We will prove that he hid his money from me." "You do not have any money to hire a lawyer, Chloe," I reminded her coldly. "Your bank accounts are frozen. Your mother is currently facing federal fraud charges. You are wearing a dirty dress and standing in my office with blistered feet because you could not even afford a taxi ride across town. The game is completely over. You played your hand, you bet your entire life on a pair of losing cards, and the house just took every last chip you had on the table. Chloe collapsed into the heavy leather guest chair, burying her face in her hands. She did not scream or yell anymore. She just let out a low, agonizing moan of pure, absolute defeat. She had tried every single angle. She had tried playing the victim, she had tried begging for mercy, and she had tried threatening me with legal action. Every single door was completely bolted shut and locked from the outside. She was entirely trapped in a prison of poverty that she and her mother had built with their own arrogant hands. I walked back around my large mahogany desk and pressed the silver button on my intercom system. "Elena," I said, speaking clearly into the microphone, "please send security to my office immediately. We have a guest who is ready to leave the premises." Chloe slowly looked up at me, her face completely broken and completely devoid of any remaining hope. She looked like an empty shell. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, echoing in the large, silent office. "How am I supposed to live?" I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no pity for the parasite that had tried to destroy my family. "That is no longer my problem," I said flatly. "You are an adult. You can get a job. You can learn how to work for a living, just like the working-class people you spent your entire life mocking and belittling. Maybe you can find a job sweeping the floors at one of the country clubs you used to belong to." Two large security guards, dressed in immaculate dark suits, entered my office silently. They stepped up beside the leather chair and waited for my final command. Chloe stood up slowly, picking up her ruined designer purse from the floor. She did not look at me again. She knew she had been completely and utterly defeated by a woman who was light years ahead of her in every possible way. I turned my back to her, walking toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked my sprawling, pristine estate. The green manicured lawns stretched out endlessly beneath the bright afternoon sun, reflecting the absolute stability and immense power of the empire I had built with my own two hands. "You have no house, no money, and no husband," I said, my voice cold and final, cutting through the quiet room like a sharpened blade. "The exit is that way. Do not step on my grass." Marcus walked for hours through the dark, sleeping city of Atlanta. The heavy suitcase rolling behind him was the only sound in the quiet night. He had left the filthy motel room and his lying wife behind him, completely severing the toxic ties that had bound him for 5 years. As the sun began to rise, painting the morning sky in shades of pale pink and bright orange, he finally reached the massive wrought iron security gates of my private estate. He stood there for a long time, staring up at the towering stone walls. He was physically exhausted, his feet were blistered, and his expensive suit was wrinkled and stained with sweat. But for the first time in his entire adult life, his mind was completely clear. He pressed the silver call button on the intercom panel and waited. When my assistant answered, he simply said, "It is Marcus, I need to see my mother." The heavy gate slowly swung open, granting him access to the massive empire he had foolishly traded for a fragile illusion. I was standing in the grand foyer when he walked through the heavy double-glass doors. He left his suitcase on the pristine front porch and stepped into the quiet, elegant house. He looked absolutely exhausted and completely broken. All the arrogant confidence he used to carry when he wore his designer suits and flashed his platinum credit cards was entirely gone. He looked like a lost, frightened little boy who had finally realized the absolute magnitude of his mistakes. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking heavily with emotion. "I left her, Mom. I finally left her. She lied to me about being pregnant just to keep me from signing the divorce papers. You were completely right about everything. They were using me the entire time. I'm so incredibly sorry." I walked across the polished marble floor and wrapped my arms around my son. I held him tightly, feeling his broad shoulders shake as he completely broke down and cried into my shoulder. A single tear escaped my eye and rolled down my cheek. I was his mother, and seeing him in such profound pain shattered my heart. I had missed my son so much. We stood there in the grand foyer for a long time, simply holding each other. When he finally pulled away, he wiped his wet face with the back of his hand and offered me a small, hopeful smile. He looked around the massive, beautiful house, taking a deep breath of the cool, clean, air-conditioned air. "It feels so good to be home, Mom," he said, his voice sounding lighter than it had in years. "I promise I will never take any of this for granted ever again. I will come back to the firm and work twice as hard. We can get the legal team to finalize the divorce, and I can move into one of the guest suites upstairs. I will completely rebuild my life here with you." He was speaking quickly, his words tumbling out in a rush of immense relief. He genuinely believed that because he had finally done the right thing and walked away from Chloe, his punishment was completely over. He assumed the heavy doors to his wealthy lifestyle were simply going to swing wide open and welcome him back into a world of endless luxury and absolute financial security. I looked at my son, feeling a deep, profound ache in my chest. This was the exact moment that would permanently define the rest of his entire life. I had to be strong enough to break his heart one more time in order to completely save his soul. I slowly stepped back, creating a small physical distance between us. I folded my hands calmly in front of me and looked directly into his hopeful, tired eyes. "You are always welcome in my home, Marcus," I said, my voice soft but incredibly firm. "I love you more than anything in this entire world, and I am so incredibly proud of you for finally finding the courage to walk away from that highly toxic environment. But you are not moving into a guest suite today, and you are absolutely not coming back to work at the executive offices of my private equity firm." Marcus froze completely. The small, hopeful smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a look of sheer total confusion. He blinked several times, trying to understand what I was saying. "But Mom," he stammered, taking a step toward me. I left her. "I did exactly what you told me to do. I walked away from the Kensington family. I have absolutely nothing left. My bank accounts are totally frozen and I only have a few dollars in my pocket. Where am I supposed to go? How am I supposed to live if you do not give me my trust fund back? I did the right thing, Mom. Why are you still punishing me?" His voice was rising, trembling with a sudden fresh wave of absolute panic. He had expected a massive reward for his basic moral decency. "I am not punishing you, Marcus," I explained calmly, walking into the main living room and gesturing for him to follow me. "I am finally parenting you. For the last 5 years, I allowed you to live a complete fantasy. I gave you unlimited access to my wealth because I wanted you to be happy. But that money completely ruined you. It made you incredibly weak. It made you desperately seek the validation of racist, arrogant people who only tolerated you because of the massive house I bought for you. You traded your integrity and your self-respect for a country club membership and a blonde wife who secretly despised you. If I give you all that money back today, you will never actually learn how to survive. You will just find another toxic person to attach yourself to." Marcus stood in the center of the massive living room, staring at the floor. He knew I was telling him the absolute, undeniable truth. Every single word cut straight through his soul because he had lived that terrifying reality for 5 agonizing years. He had felt the constant suffocating pressure of trying to impress people who were entirely fake. I walked over to him and placed my hand gently on his shoulder, forcing him to look up and meet my eyes. "You must learn to stand on your own 2 feet as a real man," I said, my voice echoing with absolute, unwavering conviction. "You must learn how to survive without hiding behind my money or begging for their shallow validation. You need to build your own absolute strength from the ground up. You need to know exactly what it feels like to earn every single dollar you spend, so nobody can ever use your finances to control your entire life again." I waited for him to argue. I waited for him to throw a massive temper tantrum exactly like his entitled wife had done. I waited for him to scream that it was unfair and demand his legal right to his massive trust fund. But Marcus did not scream. He did not yell or throw things across the beautiful room. He simply looked at me, tears welling up in his eyes once again, and nodded his head slowly. He took a deep breath, letting the heavy, absolute reality of his situation settle entirely into his bones. "You are right, Mom," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet, profound acceptance. I am weak. I let them treat me like garbage because I was so terrified of losing the money and the fake lifestyle. I do not want to be that pathetic man anymore. I want to be someone you can actually respect. I want to respect myself. Tell me what I need to do." A massive wave of absolute pride washed over my entire heart. My son was finally waking up. The heavy, toxic fog that had completely clouded his mind for 5 years was finally lifting. I walked over to my heavy mahogany desk, sitting in the corner of the room, and picked up a small silver business card. I walked back and handed the card directly to Marcus. "I own a massive commercial real estate development company on the south side of Atlanta," I explained, watching him read the address printed on the card. "They are currently breaking ground on a new low-income housing project. I spoke to the site foreman yesterday morning. He is looking for general laborers. It is incredibly hard, dirty physical work. You will be mixing concrete, carrying heavy steel beams, and digging trenches in the hot Georgia sun. You will start at the absolute bottom, earning minimum wage. You will not tell anyone on that construction site that you are my son." I continued setting the absolute boundaries of his new reality. "You will not use my name to get special treatment. You will rent a very small, cheap apartment using your first paycheck, and you will learn how to budget your money to buy your own groceries. You will wake up before dawn every single day, and you will work until your hands are completely covered in blisters. If you can do this for 1 entire year without quitting, without complaining, and without begging me for a massive bailout, I will legally unfreeze your corporate trust fund. But until that day comes, you are completely on your own. You have to prove to me, and more importantly to yourself, that you are finally a grown man." Marcus looked at the small silver business card resting in the palm of his hand. He ran his thumb over the raised black lettering. He thought about the expensive tailored suits he used to wear and the completely clean manicured hands he used to type on his laptop in his air-conditioned executive office. He thought about the massive change he was about to endure. But then he thought about the incredible freedom he had felt walking away from that filthy motel room. He looked up at me, his expression completely serious and filled with a brand new, quiet determination. "I will be there tomorrow morning," he said, his voice steady and completely firm. "I will not let you down, Mom. I promise you, I will do exactly what it takes to rebuild my life the right way." The very next morning, the hot, sticky Atlanta sun was barely rising over the eastern horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the massive dirt lot of the commercial construction site. Dozens of heavy diesel trucks were already rumbling loudly across the uneven ground, kicking up massive clouds of thick red dust. The air smelled strongly of wet concrete, hot exhaust, and fresh-cut lumber. Men in heavy steel-toed boots and bright yellow reflective vests were shouting orders over the deafening roar of the heavy machinery. It was a chaotic, loud, and completely unforgiving environment, entirely different from the quiet, pristine halls of the country club Marcus used to frequent. A small, rusty used car pulled into the gravel parking lot near the main construction trailer. Marcus had used the absolute last few dollars in his empty bank account to buy a cheap pair of heavy canvas work pants, a plain cotton shirt, and a pair of scuffed steel-toed boots from a local discount store. He stepped out of the car, the cool morning air immediately hitting his face. He walked slowly toward the main trailer, where a large, rough-looking man with a thick gray beard was handing out daily assignments. Marcus approached the man holding out the silver business card I had given him the day before. The foreman looked at the card, then looked Marcus up and down, completely unimpressed by his soft hands and clean face. "You are the new guy," the foreman grunted, pointing a thick, dirty finger toward a massive pile of heavy wooden forms on the far side of the dirt lot. "Grab a hard hat from that bin and start carrying those boards to the foundation trench. Do not stop until the entire pile is completely moved." Marcus nodded, putting on the heavy yellow plastic hard hat and securing the strap under his chin. He walked over to the massive pile of rough, splintered wood. He reached down and hoisted the first heavy board onto his shoulder. The rough wood immediately bit into his soft skin, sending a sharp sting through his body. He gritted his teeth and began the long, slow walk toward the deep, muddy foundation trench. By noon, his hands were completely covered in raw, painful blisters. His back ached with a deep, fiery pain he had never experienced before, and his plain cotton shirt was entirely soaked with heavy sweat. His muscles screamed for relief, but he refused to stop moving. He watched the other men working alongside him laughing and joking, despite the back-breaking labor. They were authentic, honest men earning their living with their own two hands. Marcus wiped the thick, dirty sweat from his forehead and smiled a genuine, exhausted smile. He was standing in the literal dirt, starting from absolute rock bottom, but for the very first time in his life, he was finally building something completely real. While Marcus was quietly rebuilding his life with honor and sweat on a dusty construction site, the absolute destruction of the Kensington family was playing out on the front pages of every major financial newspaper in the city. The massive, fraudulent empire Brenda had spent a decade desperately trying to protect had finally completely collapsed under its own rotten weight. Just a few days after I officially fired her and seized her remaining personal assets, a fleet of dark black federal vehicles pulled up to the cheap motel where she had been hiding. Federal agents wearing heavy, tactical vests raided the room with their weapons drawn. They did not care about her ruined designer clothes or her former status as a high society chairwoman. They slapped heavy, cold steel handcuffs onto her wrists and physically dragged her out into the bright, flashing lights of local news cameras. I had personally handed the massive folder of completely undeniable physical evidence directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The forged loan documents, the fake corporate tax returns, the hidden offshore accounts, and the digital wire transfers were all perfectly cataloged and presented on a silver platter for the federal prosecutors. Brenda was formally indicted on 27 separate counts of massive federal wire fraud and felony identity theft. The judge during her initial hearing looked at her with absolute, complete disgust. She was denied bail entirely because she was considered an extreme flight risk with absolutely zero remaining legitimate financial ties to the community. The arrogant woman who had once stood in my living room and threatened to send my innocent son to a federal prison was now sitting in a cold, damp holding cell wearing a standard-issue bright orange jumpsuit. She had no expensive makeup, no authentic pearl necklaces, and absolutely no power left to manipulate anyone around her. She was entirely alone, facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a federal penitentiary with absolutely no hope of a successful appeal. Chloe, on the other hand, managed to completely avoid federal prison because she was genuinely too ignorant to be involved in her mother's massive corporate crimes. She had absolutely no idea how the business operated. But avoiding a federal prison cell did not save her from an absolute living hell on the outside. With her husband permanently gone and her mother locked away behind thick steel bars, Chloe was completely and utterly stranded in the city. She had absolutely no college degree, no practical job skills, and a last name that was now completely synonymous with massive public financial fraud. Nobody in the corporate world would ever hire her. Her credit score was entirely destroyed, making it impossible for her to rent even the cheapest, smallest apartment in the city. Out of pure absolute desperation, she had to beg a manager at a local high-end restaurant for a minimum wage job just to afford a tiny, dirty room in a terrible boarding house. But it was not just any high-end restaurant. Out of sheer poetic irony, the only place desperate enough for cheap, unskilled labor was the exact same exclusive dining establishment where Chloe used to spend thousands of dollars of my money. It was the exact same restaurant where she used to snap her manicured fingers at the hard-working waitstaff, complain loudly about the expensive wine, and demand that people be fired for bringing her the wrong appetizer. Now she was the one wearing the stiff, uncomfortable black uniform. Now she was the one standing on her feet for 12 agonizing hours a day, carrying heavy trays of hot food and enduring the absolute worst abuse from wealthy, entitled customers. Her soft, pampered hands became rough, cracked, and burned from washing massive piles of dirty dishes in the scalding kitchen sink. Her feet ached with a constant, terrible, throbbing pain, and her arrogant spirit was completely broken every single time the angry kitchen manager yelled at her for moving too slowly or dropping a plate. The ultimate humiliation for Chloe did not come from the grueling physical labor or the terrible wages. It came exactly 2 weeks into her miserable new job. She was assigned to wait on a large table of wealthy women in the main dining room during the busy lunch rush. She walked over to the table holding her small green notepad and her cheap plastic pen, feeling completely exhausted and entirely defeated. She looked up and her heart completely stopped beating in her chest. Sitting at the table drinking expensive imported champagne and laughing loudly were her 3 former best friends from the elite country club. The exact same women she had taken on a massive luxury shopping spree just a few short weeks prior. The women stopped laughing the absolute second they recognized the tired, sweaty waitress standing awkwardly in front of their table. They looked at her cheap, stiff uniform and her messy, unwashed blonde hair with expressions of pure, unfiltered, absolute disgust. They did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. They did not ask how she was doing or offer to help her out of her terrible situation. Instead, they completely turned on her like a pack of starving wolves. They spent the next 2 excruciating hours making her life an absolute miserable nightmare. They ordered complicated custom drinks and sent them back to the bar 3 separate times, claiming they were not made correctly. They intentionally dropped their dirty cloth napkins on the floor and demanded that Chloe crawl on the ground to pick them up. They spoke to her exactly like she was a stray dog, mocking her completely ruined family and laughing about her mother's federal indictment right to her burning face. Chloe was forced to stand there and silently take the vicious psychological abuse because she desperately needed the hourly wages just to survive another day. When the cruel women finally finished their expensive meal, they paid the massive bill, leaving exactly $0 for a tip. Instead, they left a single dirty penny sitting directly on top of the receipt, accompanied by a cruel handwritten note telling her to enjoy her new life. Chloe retreated to the dark kitchen supply closet, collapsed onto a box of napkins, and cried until her entire body violently shook. She was violently pulled from her pathetic tears when the angry restaurant manager barged into the small supply closet. He was sweating profusely and looking incredibly panicked, holding a clipboard tightly to his chest. He grabbed Chloe by the arm and roughly pulled her back out into the bright, chaotic kitchen. "Wipe your face right now," he demanded, his voice shaking with intense nervous energy. A highly important VIP guest just walked through the front doors and booked the entire private dining room in the back for a massive celebration. The other experienced servers are completely overwhelmed with the dinner rush, and I need you to go serve that private table immediately. Do not make a single mistake. Do not speak unless spoken to, or you will be completely fired before the night is over. Chloe quickly wiped her swollen red eyes and smoothed down her wrinkled, dirty black apron. She took a deep breath, trying to push down the immense, crushing weight of her absolute misery and humiliation. She grabbed a fresh, polished silver tray and walked slowly out of the loud kitchen, moving carefully through the crowded main dining area toward the exclusive private room located at the very back of the establishment. The heavy, dark velvet curtains were pulled tightly shut, securing the absolute privacy of the wealthy elite guests sitting inside. Chloe reached out with a trembling hand and slowly pushed the thick curtains aside, stepping into the quiet, beautifully decorated, elegant space. She pasted a fake, polite smile onto her exhausted face and looked up to formally greet the highly important guests. The heavy silver tray instantly slipped from her weak hands and crashed loudly onto the polished hardwood floor, echoing through the silent room. Sitting at the absolute center of the large table, surrounded by a circle of incredibly powerful, wealthy, elegant women, was the true mastermind behind her entire destruction. It was me. It was Desiree Washington. Chloe stood completely frozen in the doorway of the private dining room, the heavy silver tray clattering loudly against the polished hardwood floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet, elegant space, but none of the wealthy, powerful women sitting around the massive table even flinched. Sitting directly at the head of the table, wearing a stunning tailored charcoal suit and a string of flawless, authentic pearls, was me, Desiree Washington. I was surrounded by the most elite, influential black women in Atlanta, including federal judges, corporate executives, and medical chiefs of staff. Chloe felt the last remaining drops of blood completely drain from her pale, exhausted face. Her knees violently shook beneath her cheap, stiff black uniform. She had expected to serve a group of anonymous, wealthy strangers, but instead she was staring directly into the eyes of the absolute architect of her complete and total destruction. She wanted to turn around and run away, to sprint out the back door of the kitchen and disappear into the dark city streets, but she was entirely trapped. She desperately needed the meager wages from this shift just to survive another miserable night in her terrible boarding house. I did not gasp or smile a vicious, triumphant smile when I saw her standing there trembling in her dirty apron. True power does not require theatrical gloating or loud dramatic scenes. True power is absolute, complete indifference. I simply looked at her for a brief second, my expression entirely blank and entirely unbothered, as if I were looking at a completely insignificant speck of dust on a beautiful painting. "Please clean up that mess and bring us the menus," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of any emotion. I turned my attention back to the brilliant federal judge sitting to my right, smoothly continuing our complex conversation about philanthropic legal structures. Chloe was completely paralyzed. She had braced herself for a barrage of cruel insults and vicious mockery, exactly like the terrible treatment she had just received from her former country club friends. But my absolute indifference was somehow infinitely more devastating. It proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that she was completely irrelevant to my massive existence. Chloe dropped to her raw, aching knees and began frantically gathering the scattered silver cutlery and the dropped water glasses from the polished floor. Her hands shook so violently that the silverware rattled loudly together, drawing annoyed glances from the restaurant manager who was hovering nervously near the heavy velvet curtains. He hissed at her to hurry up and stop embarrassing the establishment. Chloe felt hot, humiliating tears welling up in her eyes, but she forced herself to swallow them down. She scrambled to her feet and practically ran back to the kitchen to retrieve the leather-bound menus. For the next 2 hours, she was forced to endure the ultimate psychological torture. She had to stand perfectly still in the corner of the private room, serving expensive courses of gourmet food and pouring vintage wine for a table of brilliant, successful women who completely ignored her existence. She had to listen to us discuss massive real estate acquisitions, global travel, and multi-million-dollar charitable endowments. She was forced to physically witness the incredible, vibrant world she had completely thrown away because of her own arrogant, toxic racism. Every single time she approached my side of the table to clear a plate or refill my crystal water glass, her hands trembled uncontrollably. She kept her head bowed, deeply staring down at her scuffed black work shoes, absolutely terrified to make eye contact with me. She remembered the day she had stood in her massive mansion and pointed her perfectly manicured finger at my face, demanding that I get out of her house. Now she was the one serving my food, sweeping my crumbs, and standing quietly in the shadows, while I occupied the absolute center of power. The poetic justice of the situation was incredibly thick and entirely suffocating for her. When the long, elegant dinner finally came to an end, I signaled the nervous restaurant manager to bring me the final bill. The total cost of the luxurious meal was astronomical, easily exceeding what Chloe would earn in 3 entire months of grueling physical labor at this terrible job. I pulled my heavy metal black card from my designer purse and placed it onto the small leather tray. The manager processed the payment immediately, bowing his head deeply and profusely, thanking me for my continued patronage. He handed the leather tray back to me, along with a sleek black pen, so I could sign the final receipt. Chloe stood a few feet away, holding a dirty towel, waiting to clear the remaining dessert plates. She watched me with wide, exhausted eyes, entirely defeated by the cruel, brutal reality of her new life. I picked up the black pen and smoothly signed my name on the bottom line of the expensive receipt. I did not leave a $0 tip like her cruel former friends had done. I was not a petty, vindictive woman. I reached into my designer purse and pulled out a crisp new $100 bill. I placed the money directly on top of the receipt. Then I took the black pen and wrote 3 simple words on the back of the paper. Keep the change. It was the absolute perfect flawless insult directed at a woman who had spent her entire adult life falsely claiming to be high class. I stood up from the heavy wooden chair smoothing my tailored charcoal suit. My elite circle of friends stood up with me, gathering their expensive coats and designer handbags. We walked out of the private dining room, a powerful united front of true untouchable success, completely leaving Chloe behind in the quiet, empty space. Chloe slowly walked over to the table and picked up the leather tray. She stared at the crisp $100 bill and the handwritten note. The words burned into her mind, a permanent, agonizing reminder of her complete and total failure. She clutched the money to her chest and finally broke down, sobbing quietly in the empty room, mourning the absolute death of her fake, wealthy empire. She had nothing left but the agonizing memories of the massive fortune she had foolishly completely destroyed. While Chloe was weeping in the back room of a restaurant wearing a dirty uniform, a massive, beautiful transformation was taking place all the way across the city. The sweeping $5 million mansion located in the highly exclusive gated community, the exact same house where Chloe used to host her arrogant, shallow dinner parties, was no longer an empty monument to fake wealth. I had entirely repurposed the massive estate, turning a place of toxic entitlement into a true sanctuary of hope and genuine healing. The heavy iron gates of the property were now wide open, welcoming people who actually desperately needed a safe place to rest their heads. I had officially legally donated the entire property and the surrounding acreage to a local charity organization specifically dedicated to helping struggling single mothers. The grand formal dining room where Brenda had cruelly insulted my traditional pecan pie was now filled with long, sturdy tables where dozens of young mothers and their beautiful children sat together, eating warm, nutritious meals. The massive heated swimming pool where Chloe used to lounge and drink expensive wine while ignoring her bills was now filled with the joyful, loud laughter of innocent children learning how to swim in a completely safe, protected environment. The expansive, luxurious bedrooms with their custom marble bathrooms were converted into comfortable private suites, providing desperate families with a secure, peaceful place to sleep while they worked hard to get back on their feet. The mansion was finally filled with actual, genuine love, real deep gratitude, and authentic human connection, things that Chloe and Brenda had never truly understood or possessed. By entirely removing the parasitic Kensington family from that beautiful property, I had completely cleansed the toxic energy they had left behind. I had taken a symbol of profound, arrogant greed and flawlessly transformed it into a permanent, lasting legacy of immense generosity and community strength. Meanwhile, my son Marcus was continuing his own incredible journey of personal redemption. He had kept his promise to me, working grueling, exhausting hours at the dusty commercial construction site on the south side of the city. He had spent an entire year mixing heavy concrete, digging deep, muddy trenches, and carrying massive steel beams under the brutal, hot Georgia sun. Through the immense pain and the exhausting physical struggle, Marcus had finally discovered the true meaning of absolute self-respect. He had completely shed the weak, pathetic identity of the man who used to cower behind his wealthy wife and her racist mother. He had built a brand new, solid foundation of genuine, authentic masculinity. On the exact one-year anniversary of his very first day on the construction site, I officially legally unfroze his massive corporate trust fund. But Marcus did not immediately run out to buy a luxury sports car or a massive empty mansion. He used the money to start his own independent commercial development firm, specifically focused on building affordable quality housing for low-income families. He had finally learned how to use wealth as a tool for actual good, rather than a weak, shallow shield for his own insecurities. I stood alone on the wide-open, sweeping balcony of my massive luxury penthouse apartment, located at the very top of my towering corporate skyscraper. The cool evening breeze blew gently through my hair, carrying the distant, vibrant sounds of the bustling city far below. The sky was painted in breathtaking shades of deep, violent purple and bright, burning orange as the sun slowly set over the vast, incredible skyline of Atlanta. I held a crystal glass of incredibly rare vintage red wine in my hand, swirling the dark liquid slowly and taking a deep, satisfying sip. The wine tasted like absolute total victory. I looked out over the massive, sprawling city, knowing that I owned a significant portion of the towering buildings reaching up into the beautiful painted sky. I had successfully protected my massive financial empire from a family of vicious, greedy parasites. I had taught my only son a truly priceless, agonizing lesson about the vital importance of personal integrity, hard, honest work, and absolute self-respect. I had taken the immense pain and the cruel, racist insults hurled at me and flawlessly transformed them into a spectacular display of calculated, perfect justice. I did not have to scream, I did not have to throw things, and I did not have to compromise my own absolute class and dignity to completely destroy my enemies. True, genuine power never needs to raise its voice. It simply observes, it plans, and it executes with absolute flawless precision. I took one final deep breath of the cool evening air, feeling entirely peaceful and completely satisfied with the incredibly beautiful new world I had built from the ashes of their destruction. The fake wealthy empire of the Kensington family was dead forever, and the true quiet, powerful legacy of Desiree Washington was absolute and completely untouchable. Thank you so much for following along with my incredible story of absolute justice and sweet, powerful revenge. If you have ever had to completely destroy a toxic person who thought they could walk all over you, I want to hear your absolute best stories in the comments section below. Please make sure to hit that like button, completely smash that subscribe button, and share this story so you never miss another incredible journey of absolute ultimate payback. Remember, true power is silent, but the results are always absolutely deafening.